Night was falling on one of the ordinary cities. Nothing foreshadowed the events that happened next. A huge crack appeared in the sky, similar to a hole in a window or mirror after throwing a huge stone. Blue streams of energy begin to flow down as if from a fantastic waterfall. Enchanted residents of the city watch a beautiful and at the same time frightening action. A little boy goes out onto the balcony. He could not sleep, and a bright glow in the window attracted his attention. The boy calls his mother to look at the miracle that is happening. From their floor, it opens up to the eye especially well. Energy, later called mana, affects individual members of humans. It is mana that allows some chosen ones to awaken and discover their superpowers. The mana storm, as it was later called, ends as suddenly as it appeared in the night sky. Only a huge crack in the firmament reminds of an inexplicable phenomenon. Similar events have happened all over the world. People have already become accustomed to the awakened, but along with super people, a super threat has also come into the world. The military asks civilians not to approach the gates that have opened in the middle of the road. Suddenly, the guard notices a change in the hum of the portal, which does not bode well. The teleporter's color changes from a soothing blue to blood red. Eerie sounds warn of impending danger. Finally, a huge creature appears from the gate, a cross between a cyclops and a goblin. Its body is decorated with all kinds of gross. The creature turns out to be a real giant. It is 10 times larger than an ordinary person, and the military are lost at the sight of such a formidable enemy. People crowded at the gate begin to flee in panic from the monster that has appeared from the gate. Not even a second passes, as the giant leaves only bloody stains on the roadway from the military. Onlookers who a moment ago photographed the still rare curiosity in the form of an open gate now run in terror and beg for help. Only one person walks against the crowd. He stands in such a pose as if interacting with similar portals is a daily routine for him. The man is not afraid of either the red glow or the size of the monster that came out of the gate. A huge mutant raises his club over the head of a man who dared to oppose him. The man looks at the mortal danger with a smile. He does not even think of running away from the battlefield. The main character hoped for a change in life after becoming awakened. The guy is running through an ice cave. Threatening sounds of unearthly origin are heard behind him. He turns around to look at his pursuer, tries to assess how out of control the situation is. The ice monster follows the guy on his heels. A few more steps of the giant, and the main character will be finished. The boy thinks that he just wanted to live a quiet life in which no one could rob or beat him. But all his allies died a terrible death. They had nothing to oppose to the unexpected threat. The hero creates a magic blade in his hand and turns around to fight back the monster. He hurls a dagger with all his might at a huge ice monster in the hope of inflicting at least minimal damage. But the blade only bounces off the thick skin of the golem, consisting of pure ice. The magic weapon ricochets off the monster's body and sticks into the ceiling of the ice cave. The monster accelerates. It intends to finish off the hero with one blow. The monster misses, and its huge paw hits the floor next to the guy. From a powerful blow, a thick crack goes along the ground under the hero's feet. In the end, the floor opens up under the guy's feet, and he falls into the resulting hole. In flight, the hero thinks that he wanted to make at least one real friend in his entire short life. With a loud splash, he falls into a small lake at the bottom of a cave hidden under the floor. Reflexively, the hero tries to capture air into his lungs. Of course, he cannot do this underwater. Consciousness leaves the main character gradually. He already feels the approaching inevitable breath of death. Suddenly, a bright blue glow appears in front of the guy's eyes. Streams of mana capture his attention. The ice monster leaves the scene of the battle. He believes that he was able to deal with the annoying guy. But the sound coming from the hole just made by the blow makes the golem turn around. The monster does not have great intelligence, but even he understands that the enemy seems to be rising to the surface. Meanwhile, the hero gets out of the lake. He covers the distance from the reservoir to the hole in the floor, using weapons made of pure energy as steps. Upon reaching the surface, the protagonist freezes in front of a huge ice monster. The golem raises both hands above the guy's head in an attempt to finally get rid of the man once and for all. But the hero does not want to die so helpless. His eyes are filled with a blue glow of mana. Suddenly, the monster's body is pierced by dozens of blades created by the boy's ability. The sharp energy blades practically slice the golem in half, leaving deep cuts all over its body. The monster falls on its back, struck by the protagonist's unexpected and powerful attack. The almost exhausted guy stands over the body of the defeated monster, trying to comprehend the last minutes that have passed. Suddenly, the golem's eyes are filled with fire and the silent Hulk begins to move. The hero's defensive reaction is not long in coming. Without realizing it, he again uses the mana flowing through his veins. Dozens of energy blades appear around the guy. He is ready to finish off the ice monster once and for all. A second after the end of the battle, a mysterious interface appears in front of the hero's eyes, informing him that the conditions for becoming a player have been met. Shod in ordinary sneakers, the main character runs through the dense jungle. He is almost exhausted, but does not stop on the way to the goal. Finally, the hero runs out into a clearing where two young men are already waiting for him. The girl specializes in inflicting damage in close combat, and the guy clad in armor plays the role of a tank. A heavy shield can be seen behind his back. The knight says that he was also late for his first assignments when he was younger. The protagonist apologizes for being late, sweat dripping from his forehead, and he barely recovers his breath. But the allies calm Sean down. They say that he was only delayed for a couple of minutes and the expedition has not yet begun. The main character is worried. He joined the guild only 3 months ago and managed to be late for his first sortie. The company heads towards the gate. The knight and the girl discuss what they will do after they finish the task. For Sean, this will be the first dungeon he goes to as support. And it is important for the main character to prove his usefulness, not only for the team but also for the guild as a whole. At the entrance to the dungeon, the hero is met by the commander of the group, an experienced hunter whose face is half hidden by a cloth mask. The captain asks if Sean has been involved in such sorties before, or if this is his first attempt. The main character replies that he has been to the dungeons several times as an assistant, but as a support for the first time. The commander explains that Sean will need to keep an optimal distance if he gets too close to the epicenter of the battle. There is a high chance of taking serious damage. If he is too far away, the team will not have time to come to his aid and the consequences will be sad. The captain asks Sean to stay away and use his specialization, weapon creation. The commander of the group is an assassin, and he asks Sean to create daggers on signal. Nothing else is required from the guy. The main character, just in case, clarifies whether it is necessary to create weapons for the rest of the group. But the assassin assures that the dungeon is not difficult, and the main character should not worry so much. Only one will have enough help. The mage asks the group to stop. He activates the skill of searching for living creatures and senses the monsters ahead. The captain orders to prepare for battle, hold the line, and carefully observe the situation. The assassin asks the mage to clarify how many creatures he senses and what level of monsters await them. The mage could feel 3 small auras and 1 large enough to be the boss of the dungeon. The captain asks Sean how long it takes to create 1 dagger, and the guy replies that it will take him about 20 seconds. The assassin asks to start creating, because in 40 seconds he plans to deal with the boss with the help of his skills. Finally, the team reaches a room guarded by giant crystal lizards. The creatures notice the hunters and immediately rush to attack. They want to tear apart the troublemakers on the spot. The tank is preparing to repel the attack, and the girl is warming up her fists. She plans to have a good fight. The knight activates the skill. The flow of energy covers his entire body, and the clicks of electricity-like discharges can be heard in the air. Finally, the skill is ready. It increases the characteristics of the tank, and it raises a shield over its head. In a second, the guy forcefully lowers the shield, sticks it into the ground. A shockwave spreads through the room, scattering the lizards in different directions. The girl does not keep herself waiting. She is ready to do her part of the work and takes off. On the move, she prepares for a powerful blow, her fist whistling through the air. Finally, the girl unleashes all her power on the face of the lizard, which was unlucky enough to stand in her way. Kate performs a spectacular acrobatic move and jumps over the carcass of a monster that has passed out. The blow was so strong that when the girl lands, the monster's carcass is still high above the ground. Kate turns around to check on the others and notices that the lizard she hit has already recovered. He and the rest of the opponents are about to attack the tank. The monsters quickly begin to close the distance. The girl warns of an imminent attack. She shouts to attract the attention of her allies. The knight takes a defensive stance. Behind his back, the magician begins to cast a spell. Fireballs appear at the raised palms of the wizard. He shouts words in an unknown language, and he begins to attack. Dozens of fiery jets burst out of the mage's hands and fly towards the attacking monsters. The room is lit up with a bright light from a powerful explosion caused by the spell. The temperature of the fire is so high that only ash remains of the lizards, which hangs in the air for a moment and then quietly settles on the ground. The magician rejoices. He has always worried at such crucial moments, because the fate of the entire team depended on him. The main character thinks that the team acts very coherently, as befits members of the same guild. The magic dagger in his hand takes shape. The handle is almost ready. The assassin asks to hurry up, and the hero thinks that this is not the time to be distracted by the actions of the team. Finally, the weapon is ready and Sean grabs the dagger by the handle, checking the quality of the blade. The main character shouts to the commander that he has finished creating the item and throws the weapon towards the assassin. The captain turns slightly to track the weapon with his eyes and deftly catches the blade in his hand by the hilt. Dark flashes pass from the handle to the blade. This is the assassin using a special skill to strengthen the weapon. Finally, the entire blade exudes a powerful aura, as if the object was created from pure shadow energy. The captain closes the distance and runs close to the boss, preparing for a fatal blow. The assassin makes a quick dash and with a slight movement of the shadow weapon, cuts the throat of the huge lizard. The severed head of the monster falls behind the cunning killer with a thud. The skill worked flawlessly again. The gun dissolves in the hands of the commander. The shadow energy is so powerful that any weapon becomes disposable after use. The team gathers and finds out from each other if there are any victims. But in this battle, there were no losses and even no injuries. The main character thinks that he is in good company. He did not even expect that each of them has such skills. But he was especially surprised by the well-coordinated teamwork that allowed him to finish the fight so quickly and effectively. Sean himself believes that in comparison with them, he is absolutely useless and practically did not affect the result. He blames himself for barely having time to create just one dagger, and even getting distracted in the process to watch the actions of the others. Sean thinks that he hardly deserves to be in such a well-coordinated group. His skills are too weak. The hero is distracted from his heavy thoughts by the voice of the commander, who finds out if the hero is okay. Sean is embarrassed and says that he survived thanks to the actions of the team, and he himself was practically useless. But the captain brushes aside the hero's doubts. He says that thanks to the skill of creating weapons, he saved a lot of money. After all, shadow enhancement, although it gives huge damage, absorbs any weapon after one use. Therefore, the assassin thanks the hero for saving resources and assures that he should not worry. He praises the main character for his help, especially for such a successful sortie into his very first dungeon. The assassin needed a team member with the skill of creating weapons, and he asked the hero not to give up and continue to improve. Tank interrupts the conversation and suggests that we start collecting loot and return home. Suddenly, the walls of the dungeon shudder. The heroes can barely stand on their feet. The mage suggests that the cave may have begun to collapse after the boss was destroyed, and the team needs to hurry. The main character notices something and points his finger. His words are overshadowed by the noise of the earthquake. The team turns around and sees a part of the ice wall crumbling under the action of the tremors, opening a passage. The mage illuminates the road with his staff. He carefully examines the open space. After finishing the analysis, the wizard turns to the team and says that this is a path that is connected to some room in the depths of the cave. The captain of the team ponders the mage's words. He looks into the resulting passage, doubting whether it is worth exploring the mysterious path. But Tank has already drawn a picture of treasure that lies at the end of this secret cave and wants to explore it. Following him, the girl joins in. She offers to quickly check what the formed passage is hiding. The magician reports that he does not feel a single aura of a living being ahead. And the commander succumbs to the conditions of the team members. He believes that it will not hurt to collect additional loot. The wizard does not quite agree with the decision of the head of the group, but still agrees to continue his way inside the cave. The assassin invites the newcomer to come with him, believing that the additional treasures will be useful to the whole team. The team carelessly heads to the opened entrance, excited by the opportunity to earn some extra money. The terrifying muzzle of the ice giant appears out of nowhere, catching the entire group off guard. Sean tries to run away from the golem, which is rushing after him faster and faster. On the spot, the main character goes through what happened in his head and cannot understand how he survived. He cannot believe that such a dangerous opponent has appeared in a dungeon of such a low level. The entire team of the hero was destroyed in a few moments. Moreover, the mage could not even feel such a powerful enemy inside the dungeon. As he continues to run, Sean turns his head slightly to see how far away he is. But the ice golem follows the hero at his heels and is about to catch up with the victim. The monster uses a powerful skill and slams the ground in front of it. The force of the blow is so great that the hero is swept away by a wave of energy and loses his balance. Sean falls backwards, plows the ground with his back, and blood clots fly out of his mouth. Trying to get up, the hero leans on his right hand, almost losing consciousness. The golem continues the chase. The distance between him and the hero is rapidly closing. With the last of his strength, Sean creates a weapon with the help of his skill, trying to somehow resist the monster. Bleeding, the hero screams loudly and throws the created blade towards the monster. The weapon flies forward, cutting through the air in front of it. But a dagger of this level cannot leave a scratch on the icy body of an ancient creature. The golem continues to attack. The hero's attempt to stop the monster goes unnoticed. The monster strikes a devastating blow. The entire hidden cave is illuminated with magical light. The golem didn't hit the hero exactly. It hit the floor beneath him, creating a huge crack. Sean falls down, the air comes out of his lungs, and the protagonist only manages to let out one disappointed sigh. He falls into an underground reservoir, only regretting that his low level does not even allow him to use the healing skill. Choking on the icy water, Sean realizes that this is how the death he feared so much comes. His comrades in arms flash before his eyes, whom he has so recently acquired. Sean thinks he just found the team he needed, but wasn't good enough to save them. The main character thinks that it would be better not to become awake, because he has let too many people down. Suddenly, an interface appears in front of the hero's eyes with a message that he has fulfilled all the conditions for becoming a player. A bright light illuminates the underground reservoir and a mysterious power fills the guy's body. He tries to greedily grab air underwater. Only bubbles of exhaled air rise from his mouth. The interface informs the player that a reward awaits the player for completing the task, and the hero barely understands what is happening. Sean tries to take another breath, but only the icy water rushes into his lungs. Not understanding reality or dying fantasies, the hero decides to accept the award. He tries to press the appropriate button on the interface floating in front of his eyes. With the last of his strength, the hero stretches out his hand as his body sinks deeper into the abyss of darkness. He still manages to use the interface, and the mana flows allow Sean to create a ladder from the weapons created by his skill. The main character appears in front of an ice monster who thought that he had dealt with the enemy. But Sean seems to be starting to regain his vitality with the help of a sudden second wind. The golem emits a loud roar in rage. It clearly does not like this outcome of the battle. The hero's eyes light up with a blue glow. Fear and despair are replaced by a determination to destroy the enemy. A second later, Sean creates a dozen energy swords that are sent towards the monster at great speed. The blades pierce the golem's body, dealing massive damage to it, and the monster falls on its back. Sean clutches his head. Something strange happens to his body and insides. Hundreds of memories abruptly fill the hero's brain. He cannot understand where they come from. A loud sound distracts the hero from his thoughts. He raises his bleeding eyes, and he sees a golem that enters a new attack, raising his huge fist. The monster's hand falls down. Sean would not have survived such a lunge, if not for the magic shield that he managed to create literally a second before the fatal blow. The guy himself wonders how he manages not to take damage from such a powerful creature. But the protagonist's skills are too weak to hold the power of the ancient monster for long, and the shield crumbles into pieces. Sean barely manages to dodge the monster's menacing fist. The hero bounces to a safe distance. Memories from a past life tell the guy that golems of this type do not have special vulnerabilities. As if confirming the hero's thoughts, the monster enters a new attack, emitting a loud growl. The guy's eyes turn turquoise again, as if he is connecting to the network to read data. The only way to defeat the golem is to use the networld skill. In this case, a trap is created around the monster, allowing it to deal damage from all sides at once. The golem easily falls for the trick and enters the energy cage, trying to get within striking distance. Sean seizes the opportunity and clenches his fist, ordering the magic blades to attack the monster. Dozens of swords loom over the ice golem, gradually increasing their speed. They rush towards the enemy. The space of the cave is illuminated by a bright flash, as if a powerful explosion occurred inside a cunning trap. The monster falls to pieces. The head lies separate from the torso, and the expression of surprise seems to be frozen on the muzzle. Barely surviving in an unequal battle, the main character approaches the body of the defeated enemy and exhales. He has never used the Networld skill as an offensive move yet, and thinks that his abilities have been greatly enhanced. An interface appears in front of Sean's eyes, with the help of which the hero can view information about a dungeon or monster. Suddenly, a clot of violet energy appears above the defeated enemy, and the main character warily examines it. The clot smoothly flows into the hero's hand and forms a perfectly round bubble on his palm. The system informs Sean that he has activated the passive mana absorption skill. Gradually, memories from his other life begin to come to the hero's head, apparently from the future. He sees himself in a couple of years, standing in the middle of the street of the city, destroyed either by powerful magic or a cataclysm. The sun casts its first sunset rays on the jumbled and dilapidated buildings that seem to have been moved from their usual places right in the middle of the road. The vision shows the terrible consequences of some kind of catastrophe. The world has fallen and the human defenders have clearly lost in battle with an unknown enemy. Sean thinks that these may be visions from the future, but the flow of events does not have to repeat itself in his reality. He uses the interface to look at the list of available options. Thoughts of an upcoming catastrophe swarming in his head, which may be able to be canceled. Finally, Sean admits that he has become a so-called gambler, a rare representative of hunters. In the future, the chosen awakened will be called players, but at this time, their existence is not yet known. Judging by the new memories of the hero, in 2 years, the first awakened players were supposed to appear. The system offered such super people not only a graphical interface, but also various skill or performance improvements. Sometimes players also got valuable rewards, such as chests with never-before-seen artifacts. This caused a rapid growth both in the progression of the awakened themselves and in the development of the guilds to which they belonged. In the future, the hero did not become the chosen one, but the presence of such in the guild prompted him to train harder and achieve success. Sean noted that as he thought, the system turned out to be very convenient for viewing skills and the amount of experience. A scale appears in front of the protagonist's eyes, which shows the amount of infected mana he absorbed, but the guy decides to think about it later. To begin with, Sean needs to take care of the bodies of his fallen comrades because he cannot leave them in the cave. Barely holding back tears, the guy begins to pull out the team members killed by the monster one by one. The protagonist delivers the bodies to the headquarters of the Hunters Association, a huge building that has become a center for the study and analysis of the first awakened. 2 employees look out the window of the headquarters, spreading the shutters. The girl expresses doubt that the guy should have been let go so quickly. They talk about Sean, who is slowly returning home after one of the hardest days of his life. The girl continues to talk. It seems to her that the case is extremely strange and there are many mysterious facts in it. She insists that in such a mess that happened in the dungeon, only a support hunter could not survive, but the guy himself would hardly be able to kill so many high-level comrades. The detective lightly hits the girl with the corner of the folder in the crown and asks her to calm down. He says that it is not yet possible to verify the guesses, because the gates have already closed, and they only need to appeal to the facts that arise in the course of the investigation. Casey asks if the girl has any specific assumptions, because such cases have begun to surface more and more often. The detective knows that hunters have begun to sneak into the gates, because if they are discovered, according to the law, an auction should begin, and weak guilds will not be able to afford to clear dungeons. He asks the girl to call the boy for a second interrogation, which may clarify the situation. The detective himself is heading for the exit from the building. Judging by the tie sticking out of his pocket, his working day has already ended and even managed to drag on. On the way, he looks at the cover of the folder with the case of a strange guy, remembering his name just in case. It seems to the man that this time the case is very strange, different from those that he investigated dozens of weeks earlier. The detective recalls that Sean behaved very calmly during interrogation, which is unusual for people who find themselves in such a situation. In theory, the guy should have panicked, but he calmly and clearly explained and talked about what had happened. The detective notes that perhaps Sean just has such a temperament. From time to time, the man dealt with cold-blooded suspects or witnesses. But Casey is sure that something is wrong in this case, although he does not understand what exactly. Finally, the man exhales and decides to postpone the matter at least until the morning, because in order to get to the bottom of the truth, You just need to carefully analyze everything. The hero decides to take a long route home to digest what happened. He looks at the phone screen and thinks that this time everything went awry and along a strange path of development. To begin with, he does not remember such a gate in his previous life. Besides, the application form for the gate was seen by all members of the team. The form had an association stamp on it, so the gate couldn't belong to the unidentified class. This means that either someone pretended to be a representative of the association, or the Hunters Association itself is involved in such shady affairs. But most of all, the hero was worried that such a situation could happen not only to his guild. All the news feeds were filled with reports of missing, awakened in another unidentified gate, usually young and sturdy hunters like Team Captain Sean. From the realization of a terrible thought, the main character's legs begin to tremble. It seems that someone decided to wipe the heroes off the face of the earth. He decides that it will be in his best interest to carefully hide his newly discovered abilities. Sean was already the only survivor of the incident at the gate, and if he attracted even more attention, he would definitely be quickly removed. The hero shudders at this thought. Now it seems to him that he will forever be followed. Sean activates the interface and begins to develop a plan for the future of life. There are a few years left before the players appear, and the main character decides to spend them on developing his current skills. The guy wants to find at least one skill that will help him secretly become stronger. Finally, he finds a skill that fits all the parameters and activates it with a smirk. In the thicket of the swampy forest, the lights of shining swords and powerful spells flash. The sounds of a hard struggle are heard. A swordsman attacks a huge humanoid hyena, which hides behind a heavy and strong wooden shield. The awakened sword breaks from a powerful blow. A confused expression appears on the hero's face. With a strong swing of the shield, the hyena sends the guy flying. He is lucky that the blow was not fatal. Air comes out of the hero's lungs. A mixture of surprise, fear, and anger can be read on his face. The guy sticks his sword into the ground to extinguish the inertia from the blow and not fly to the other side of the forest. He jumps to his feet and looks up, as if he saw a bird flying in the sky. But this formidable hyena makes a giant leap towards the confused prey. The hero loses his composure for a second, fascinated by the power and agility of the terrible monster. At the last second before the blow, the guy manages to jump away from the descending weapon of the monster. The entire team of the hero lost morale. They clearly gave up hope of defeating the monster on their own. The hyena begins to close the distance, holding a huge club in her right hand, which must weigh at least 100 kilograms. This is the Lord of Knolls, who is distinguished not only by his increased resistance to physical attacks. His thick skin also reflects spells. A swordsman can't understand how a monster of this level could appear in such a low-rank gate. Knoll begins to attack again. A terrifying roar bursts out of its mouth, and the monster bares its razor-sharp fangs. The team's tank, although trembling with horror, manages to instantly reach the strike line. He shields his comrade from certain death with his massive shield. The heavyweight's hands tremble under the pressure of the monster. The difference in weight and strength of opponents is too great. The tank shouts to the swordsman that he will not be able to hold back the overlord's pressure for long, and the rest of the group soon risk being killed. He demands that the rest of the team wake up and try to inflict at least minimal damage on the enemy. The swordsman continues to panic over the thoughts in his head. He realizes that the Lord of Knolls was called the god of death of low-level hunters for a reason. The guy turns to the remaining team and thinks that the mages will not help him in this battle. Even the battle sorceress is shaking with fear, clinging tightly to her wooden staff. The swordsman realizes that he miscalculated when selecting a team, relying heavily on magic damage. There is only one melee fighter left in the group because the guy's sword broke during the previous attack, and he is not very good in fist fighting. He sees how the tank that miraculously holds the Gnoll Lord suffers, and realizes that the group has nothing to fight back. The swordsman regrets not assembling a larger team. He hoped that the dungeon would be simple. In addition, if he won, the loot would have to be divided among all participants, which means that he would get fewer rewards. Suddenly, the swordsman hears a sound behind him and turns around to check the source of the noise. He recalls that there is also a helper on the team who usually does not participate in battles and only gathers resources for the team. The swordsman does not understand how this guy can calmly extract resources, knowing that soon everyone will be killed by an invincible monster. The captain's attention is attracted by the tool that Sean works with. The pickaxe in the guy's hands begins to disappear, as if it is slowly being erased from this reality. It is a weapon crafting skill that is often used by support hunters. A plan begins to be born in the head of the swordsman, giving hope to at least get out of the dungeon alive. He decides to implement the idea and calls out to the assistant who extracts resources. Sean turns to the sound, surrounded by a blue glow that seems to be coming out of the guy's body, not the mana crystals behind him. The swordsman speeds up his pace, his brain frantically devising a rescue plan on the fly. Finally, the fighter reaches Sean and asks if he can create swords. The main character reluctantly replies that such a skill is among his list of skills. The swordsman asks to create a strong blade that will allow him to fight back Null. Sean refuses at first, because he volunteered to go to the dungeon as a helper, not a support hero. The fighter loses patience. He raises the tone of his voice and practically shouts that the entire team will soon die if the protagonist does not help them. Noel, meanwhile, continues to deliver powerful blows to the tank's shield. The knight risks being killed in the next few minutes, if not seconds. Sean lets out a disgruntled sigh, hoping to just quietly mine resources and develop skills unnoticed. But in the end, he agrees to create a weapon for the team, albeit with conditions. He asks the entire team to forget about the weapon crafting skill when leaving the dungeon and reward him as a support hero instead of a regular assistant. The swordsman did not expect such impudence from someone who could not become a creator and works as an assistant. Besides, all the help he asked for was just to give the team a weapon. The main character smirks. He does not consider his service so useless. Sean says that equipment is almost half the key to a successful completion of the dungeon. In addition, he is ready to vouch for the quality of his products, although his skill is not yet very developed. The swordsman, taken aback, listens to the main character. An expression of disbelief is frozen on his face. After activating the skill, the main character stretches out his hand and offers the group leader to accept help in exchange for simple conditions. A huge high-tech guild building called Overkill glitters in the midday sun. The girl hurriedly walks down the corridor, the clatter of her heels echoing off the walls. She stops in front of the massive doors leading to the building's main office. A young guy, Craig, responds to the knock and invites the visitor in. Lucy enters the huge office of the guild leader and informs her that the Hunters Association has sent a request for cooperation. The guildmaster clarifies whether the request is related to errors in dungeon ranks. He understands that the association has no other choice and is willing to pay any amount assigned. After all, only one awakened person can enter the forcibly closed gate, Craig himself. The man recognizes the face of one of the team members who got into today's news reports. He is sure that he has already seen the boy and is trying to remember when and where. Finally, Craig remembers the details of the meeting place with the mysterious assistant. Recently, the guildmaster had visited the area in front of the gate, which had been mistakenly given too low a rating. And Craig noted that survivors rarely return from such portals. The cases could be counted on the fingers of one hand. But this assistant was a member of a team that had already survived a higher-ranked dungeon twice. Craig considers this hardly a coincidence. He falls into his thoughts for a second. He is distracted from his thoughts by Lucy, who says that the dungeons with the error appear more and more often. The head of the guild concludes that the association now most likely has a lot of problems due to errors in assigning a rank. And the girl confirms his words. Recently, the head of the association has been showered with words of criticism from all sides. Craig turns around in a chair facing her assistant and orders her to increase the commission for using the encroachment skill and then monitor the developments. After that, the head clarifies whether the girl was able to get the equipment he asked for. Lucy reveals that she was unable to find a single gunsmith of the right rank, but she was able to get a sword of a lower rank. The guildmaster says that he doesn't want to waste time on low-level weapons because his skill destroys blades one by one. Getting up in his chair, Craig swears. This way, he will spend all his fortune on disposable equipment. The conversation is interrupted by a knock on the door of the guild office. The girl cuts off the sentence in mid-sentence. The door is opened by a young guy. He has alarming news that is ordered to be handed over personally to the head of the guild. Craig gets up from the table and walks over to the guy. The head didn't expect to hear anything positive. The assistant reveals that the dungeon has reopened with an error in rank. And this time, the newcomers from the Overkill Guild were trapped inside. Craig replies that the situation is an emergency and inexperienced hunters should not be left to their fate. He says that he will personally go to rescue the team from the closed gates. The sky above the city is surprisingly clear. Only a light breeze sways the leaves on the trees, and only the otherworldly hum of a huge portal is knocked out of the pacifying picture. A crowd of onlookers filming the gates on smartphones suddenly begins to turn around. All attention switches to the three people who arrived at the scene. The flashes of cameras flash. Craig approaches a young girl who is monitoring the situation around the gate and asks for a report on the situation. She replies that there are 9 people trapped inside, one of whom is an ordinary assistant, and most likely they are all already dead. Craig clarifies when the team entered the dungeon. The girl replies that about 2 hours have passed. The guildmaster reports that he hopes to find the survivors of the dungeon and will make every effort to save them. Craig and Lucy stand in front of a huge portal, the color of which resembles fresh blood spilled on the battlefield. The guildmaster throws a heavy leather suitcase in front of the gate. The man will need it later. In the meantime, he holds out his right hand, signaling Lucy to begin. The girl runs her hand into a tiny purse hanging on her shoulder. Rays of bright light burst out of the purse. Lucy pulls out a long katana that could only fit in her purse with the use of the subspace skill. She hands the gun to Craig, the head gripping the handle tightly with his right hand. He brings the sword to his face and activates his signature skill. The blade of the katana ignites with a bright flame. Craig makes a slight swing of his right arm as he slices through the space in front of him. A narrow crack appears on the surface of the portal, left after using the chapter skill. Gradually, the hole in the gate widens. The air begins to whistle inside. The katana used by the head is covered with cracks. The end of the blade begins to crumble into pieces. He hands the weapon to his assistant, which has become useless. The girl asks Craig to be as careful as possible. The head of the guild takes the suitcase thrown on the ground and moves to the entrance to the gate. Finally, Craig gets to the other side. He immediately begins to study the situation in the dungeon. After walking a few steps, the guild leader stops in front of the entrance to the gate. A huge room opens up to his eyes, littered with the corpses of enemies barely visible in pools of green blood. Craig continues to study the room and notes that the temperature and humidity in it are increased. This means that the head of the guild will have to deal with intelligent reptiles, as evidenced by the greenish bloodstains on the floor. The man concludes that the dungeon is inhabited by human-like lizards. Their intelligence and combat power increase as they grow older. These minions of the boss looked old enough, so the leader himself must be extremely experienced. Craig crosses a room that has become a mass grave for humanoid reptiles in 2 jumps. The guild leader rushes to the aid of the team as quickly as possible. He does not want to lose the newcomers. Finally, he enters the hall in which the trapped group is located. Craig stops and his gaze freezes on what is happening in the room. A huge lizard is about to strike with a sword, the size of which is comparable to an adult of average height. But to Craig's surprise, a swordsman from the missing team blocks the blow and crosses blades with the creature. The archer girl supports the fighter and whistles an arrow towards the enemy. Pierced by a projectile, one of the lizard men falls and blood begins to ooze from its side. Craig is surprised to realize that the group not only does not need to be saved, it manages to defeat superior enemy forces. The guild leader analyzes the movements of the enemies and concludes that the monsters are much more experienced than the newcomers who entered the gate. Distracted from his thoughts by the unusual clashing of blades, Craig shifts his gaze to the center of the room. The lizard knocks the sword out of the hands of a melee fighter. The weapon flies off and the guy seems to be about to come to an end. The awakened man himself looks up in horror, the huge shadow of the creature hanging over him. The reptile raises his hand, intending to deal with the swordsman with one powerful blow. Craig reacts instantly. Time seems to slow down around him. But the lizard is already delivering a crushing blow. For a second, the sparks from the creature's sword blind everyone around. However, the monster's weapon encounters an unexpected obstacle. The lizard growls in displeasure. A huge energy sword prevented the reptile from slicing the person in front of it in half. The swordsman, who has not yet realized his luck, is on his knees, and Craig, meanwhile, moves forward to meet the enemy. For a moment, the guild leader stops to look around the room. He tries to understand who was able to use such a complex spell to save the warrior, and he sees the main character who created a ghostly sword using his mana. Sean feels his eyes scrutinizing him. He tries to understand where he is being watched from. The protagonist slowly turns around in search of the source of the unusual sensation, and he meets the eyes of the head of the guild Overkill, who carefully studies the boy. The fight continues. The support uses healing spells to restore the health of fighters on the spot. The battle mage creates a fireball while the tank holds off the onslaught of a huge red lizard. Behind their backs, the main character interrupts the collection of mana stones and begins counting the participants in the sortie into the dungeon. He counts each fighter one by one and does not forget about himself. But at 9, he stops and squints at Craig, who is standing nearby. With the head of the guild, there are 10 people inside the dungeon, although Sean is sure that 9 have entered the dungeon. Craig asks the guy what he is doing in the middle of such an intense fight. Meanwhile, the assassin lunges in the direction of the enemy, trying to destroy the lizard. But the creature manages to repel the attack. The awakened sword shatters into pieces. The assassin falls on his back and remains open to the blow. The support mage runs to his friend's aid. The monster raises a giant cannon over his head. Another moment, and 2 team members will lose their lives. Craig notices the deplorable situation of the newcomers. His body instantly reacts to danger. The guild leader makes a lightning dash towards the enemy, pushing off the stone floor. He raises his katana, is about to deliver a crushing blow to the enemy. Sean thinks that he did not expect help from the guild leader himself, and draws attention to the suitcase lying next to him. Craig uses one sword, and the second is in a huge case, and the main character thinks that this is a spare weapon. Sean continues to calmly watch the fight in the middle of the room. The thin blade of the katana crosses with the reptile's huge sword, sparks flying in all directions. The force of the blow was so great that the rest of the team was almost swept away by the flow of powerful energy. Craig orders the newcomers to retreat before they fall as accidental victims of a hot battle in every sense. The assassin is exhausted and cannot utter a word, and the support mage thanks the head of the guild for saving him. Craig knocks the huge sword out of the lizard's hands with a deft movement, and the weapon crashes to the stone floor. The man's katana is illuminated by flames again. He decides to use the skill before the opponent recovers. Craig lunges forward, a few quick swings of the sword enhanced by the skill. A lizard stands behind him, wide wounds spread across the monster's body, and green blood begins to flow out. Finally, the dead monster falls to the cold floor, without having time to understand where the defeat came from. From the impact of the skill and the encounter with the enemy's huge sword, Craig's katana begins to crumble in his hands. The guildmaster notices a rapid movement in front of him. Another reptile rushes at him, apparently wanting to deal with a more powerful opponent and leave the newcomers for dessert. This time, Craig decides to retreat. He jumps to the side so as not to miss the monster's blow. The lizard misses and the guild leader barely catches his balance after a swift jump. Sean shouts at Craig. The guy wants to know how much the skill wears out the weapon. The katana is almost completely destroyed in the hands of the guild leader. The weapon becomes unsuitable for battle. The main character notes that such wear and tear probably brings huge costs. The guild leader first wants to besiege the newcomer, but is cut off when he sees the skill of creating a weapon. Sean pauses for a few seconds while he creates a new weapon for the experienced leader. The guy offers Craig to use an exquisite katana created with mana. The main character asks not to waste any more ordinary blades, especially since there is only one sword left in reserve. Craig can't believe his eyes. The high-quality katana was created by Sean in a couple of swings. The head of the guild wonders why such an experienced armorer would do the work of an assistant. Taking his old blade from the guild leader's hands, Sean voices his standard terms. In exchange for a great weapon, he asks Craig to forget about the protagonist's skills and himself after leaving the dungeon. But the head of the guild does not think that he will be able to forget about everything just because the assistant wanted to. At the same second, the katana created by Sean begins to dissolve in Craig's hands. And the main character says that in this case, the man will have to cut everyone down with his expensive high-class weapons. Realizing that he is in a hopeless situation, the head of the guild agrees with a sigh to forget about the guy's skills. The team continues to fight the huge reptiles while the head and Sean negotiate the terms of the deal. Finally, the protagonist smiles contentedly. He invites Craig to try out a new weapon. The head of the guild chooses a new target. He himself wants to test what such a delicate blade is capable of. Fortunately, there are still enough opponents in the room, and one of the lizards instantly rushes at a moving target. Craig drives his katana into his katana, using his destructive skill again, the man's eyes turning red. He crosses swords with the monster. The hall is again filled with flashes of flame, brightly illuminating everything around. The lizard screams in pain and rage. His huge sword begins to crumble. In the end, half of the giant gun is destroyed, an effect that even Craig is surprised by. The guildmaster only wanted to repel the attack, but the result exceeded his expectations. He grips the handle of the katana tighter and thinks that this weapon is not only better controllable, but also inherently much more powerful than any sword he bought. Craig squints at the protagonist, who has resumed his duties as an assistant and continues to mine mana stones. The lizard with a broken sword rushes at the head of the guild in a rage, intending to finish off the arrogant man. Despite the fact that the head of the guild was distracted by his own thoughts, he has enough reaction to a retaliatory strike. Craig stabs his katana deep into the abdomen of the giant creature and thinks it's worth testing the weapon with a skill. A huge stream of flame literally tears apart the body of the lizard from the inside, piercing the monster through. Craig grabs the opponent by the shoulder to remove the blade from the monster's abdomen. The head jumps over the reptile, choosing a more convenient position for the finishing blow. He raises his katana over his head while empowering his weapon with a skill, and plunges the red-hot blade into the lizard's head, piercing the monster's brain and neck. Green blood flies out of the mouth of the defeated reptile, eventually leaving the huge carcass for life. The opponent falls to the floor, and Craig towers over the opponent like a hunter over the caught prey. The guildmaster examines the katana and is surprised to find that there is not a scratch left on it after 2 casts of the skill. Craig begins to be surrounded by members of the rookie team. They embarrassedly thank their hero for saving him from certain death. The man notes that no one was injured, and this can already be considered a success. The comrades point to Sean and claim that if it were not for the guy who created a new weapon for them, they would all face a sad fate. Craig looks suspiciously at the protagonist, trying to understand how an ordinary assistant was able to create so many high-end weapons. Finally, the head decides to get acquainted with the guy and moves in his direction. Craig gets closer to Sean, who is already closing his backpacks full of mana stones, and asks the guy to introduce himself. But the main character believes that there is no need to fill his head with the names of some useless assistants. The head of the guild introduces himself as the first and believes that people who have been in such a situation should at least know each other by name. The protagonist closes the last backpack full of valuable loot and casts a disgruntled glance at the chapter. The guy decides not to refuse Craig and introduces himself by his real name. Sean informs the team that he will leave mana stones at the entrance to the dungeon. The guy was about to go to the entrance, but he was stopped by the head of the guild. He asks Sean to leave the backpacks with stones in place and snatches them from the protagonist's hands. And he asks his assistant to go with him to the room with the boss, because it will not be possible to leave the dungeon without defeating the main lizard. Craig asks an assistant to help him in the battle with the reptile, because without weapons he will not be so strong. But Sean assures the head that the weapon created with the skill will not break, and the help of the main character is not needed. Craig is sure that the blade will dissolve in his hands at some point, especially since the dungeon was initially assigned the wrong rank, and the fight will not be easy. Sean lets out a deep sigh. He was already hoping to rest on the way out, while the team is busy clearing the dungeon to the end. But the main character still takes off his backpacks with the loot and agrees to accompany the head of the guild in the final battle. The guy clarifies that he will just go after Craig and is not going to take part in the fight. The main hall of the dungeon is drowned in smoke from torches burning on the walls. They illuminate the cages hanging from the ceiling, which were clearly used to torture the victims. Upon entering the room, Craig freezes in place and looks forward, analyzing the strength of the opponent he sees in front of him. In the center of the hall, the boss of the dungeon sits on a throne, and under the feet of the lizard there is a guard, a giant reptile that looks more like a dragon than a lizard. The main character sees an interface that gives out information about opponents and prefers to ignore alarming inscriptions. Craig smiles. He has a premonition of an entertaining fight, and he can't wait to try out the new katana. The head says that he will try to end the fight before the katana falls apart, and Sean replies that he was not joking about the quality of the weapon and it will never break. The lizard boss jumps up from the throne, his eyes burning with rage, because he knows that his kin are finished if these two are standing in the throne room. The reptile orders its guard to attack first, and the animal immediately obeys. The creature's eyes turn red. Its agility and speed allow it to attack at the same second. Both heroes manage to react almost simultaneously and avoid the fatal blow. Craig's eyes begin to sparkle. He makes his lunge towards the huge beast. But the reptile does not allow itself to be attacked. With a blow of its tail, it stops the movement of the head. Thanks to his excellent reaction, the animal managed to survive Craig's attack. The head of the guild flies away from a powerful blow, if not for the block with the katana. The man himself would not have survived after a sudden blow with his tail. The reptile's attack was so strong that Craig flies to the second floor, resting his feet on the floor above the main hall. Using this position as a way to push off and gain speed, the chapter begins a second run. It flies towards the boss guard like a loaded cannonball. The head lizard steps in, jumping from the other end of the room, pushing off the throne with his paws. In the middle of the room, the opponents cross their blades. They look into each other's eyes, and even a semblance of a smile appears on the reptile's muzzle. Finally, the opponents jump to opposite ends of the hall. The lizard boss decides to use help. He jumps on the back of his henchman dragon and grabs the reins. A huge stream of flame bursts out of the animal's mouth. For the heroes to fall under such a stream is certain death. Craig uses his sword to block the damage of the firestorm, but suddenly notices a force field in front of him. A few seconds before the collision, the flames hit a magical shield that appeared out of nowhere. It was the protagonist who used his enhanced crafting skills and protected the guildmaster from taking damage. The tamed dragon attempts to attack in close combat using Craig's confusion, but the head dodges the bite. He jumps back to Sean and asks how the guy created the shield, since he specialized in creating weapons. The main character replies that the shield is also a kind of weapon because it can also cause damage. Craig smiles. The guild leader froze, waiting for the opponent's next turn, all his attention focused on the boss of the dungeon. Smiling, the lizard raises his hand. He has an ace up his sleeve, literally. A sharp blade attached to a long chain flies towards the guild leader at great speed. The chain wraps around the katana, burning with a bright flame. Craig barely has time to notice the movement. The lizard pulls the chain tightly, grabbing the sword, and begins to pull towards itself. The boss decided to deprive the enemy of his weapon, realizing that with the katana in his hands, the guild leader was too dangerous. Without letting go of the sword, Craig flies with the chain towards the reptile, feverishly contemplating a way out of a difficult situation. Sean asks the head of the guild to stop fooling around and continue fighting. The guy raises his hand and uses his power. A new sword begins to form in Craig's left hand. The main character has greatly succeeded in increasing the speed of creating weapons. Finally, a black katana appears in the palm of the guild leader, and he can continue fighting. Craig releases the first blade, and the empty chain flies into the boss's hands. With a new weapon, the guild leader begins to slaughter the improvised dragon, leaving him no chance to survive. The lizard boss did not expect such a trick and looks at his dying comrade in confusion. Having finished cutting the dragon, Craig throws a katana towards the monster with a powerful throw. The blade whistles over the boss's shoulder. He barely dodges the deadly projectile. Taking advantage of the moment, the guild leader closes the distance and finds himself close to the reptile. Craig delivers a powerful kick to the boss's torso, throwing him back a few meters. The creature does not have time to orient itself, and with a loud knock falls on its back. The monster begins to lose all superiority on the battlefield. Taking advantage of the reptile's confusion, the guild leader soars into the air, another katana forming in his hand. Craig activates the ability that amplifies the power of the sword. The blade is covered in flames. The boss understands that his life will end soon and can only look fascinated by the dangerous enemy. The guildmaster finally strikes, a whirlwind of fire illuminating the room, but the blade slams into the ground with a bang. Possessing an inhuman reaction, the lizard still manages to dodge the fatal blow and loses his left arm, the flesh on which burns under the influence of the enormous temperature. Not wanting to give up completely, the boss decides to try to kill at least the henchman of the guild leader. The monster grabs the spear by the shaft and begins to run towards the main character. The tip of the spear flies straight into Sean's throat, but suddenly hits an insurmountable obstacle. The lizard cannot understand how a person still stands on his feet. The main character is outraged by such impudence of the reptile, and the boss begins to seem completely pathetic against the background of the guy. The head of the guild approaches the monster from behind, his gaze full of hatred and determination to end the duel. The last thing in his life that the ancient lizard sees with his remaining right eye is a katana blazing with bright fire. Onlookers and reporters are still filming the gate through which a group of newcomers fell. Finally, the color of the portal changes to blue, and an excited hum passes through the crowd. A group of people emerge from the gate. A team of newcomers led by Craig finally return home. The reporters immediately surround the head of the guild and begin to bombard him with questions while the bodyguards hold back the press. Lucy runs up to the head of the guild. She was worried about the head and asks if he needs medical help. But Craig replies that the girl is better off looking after the rookie team. They could be seriously injured. Sean returns the backpacks full of mana gems to the group commander and informs him that he received the payment in advance, and now he will go home to rest. The protagonist takes one last look at the crowd gathered at the gates. He turns around and begins his journey home, hoping to spend the evening in peace. Finally, one of the journalists manages to squeeze his way to the head of the guild. The reporter brings the microphone closer and asks for comments on how difficult it was to save the newcomers. Craig honestly replies that he could not cope alone, turns around in search of a mysterious assistant. But the guy has already disappeared. The head of the guild is trying to look for him in the crowd. Members of the rookie team show off their broken weapons and thank Craig for his miraculous rescue. The head of the guild grabs one of the knights by the shoulders and shouts that you need to thank the assistant who created weapons for everyone. But the tank does not understand what it is about. He says that there was no gunsmith in the dungeon. The rest of the team confirms the knight's words. They knew that there was an assistant in the dungeon, but he could not create weapons. The assassin and the mage, whom the head of the guild saved earlier, are not sure that they have seen a pickaxe in Sean's hands. But they note that the guy still collected the mana stones and apparently simply lost the tool in the process of the sortie. Craig doesn't understand how the team can fail to remember that an assistant created a weapon for them. Finally, the head of the guild realizes that the main character used the magic skill of reckoning, which erases the memory of those who agreed to the guy's conditions. Craig's assistants do not understand why the boss is frozen in his tracks and cannot utter a word. Suddenly, the guild leader throws a massive suitcase with a weapon into the hands of his assistant, and he begins to quickly run towards the park, not reacting to the exclamations of the surprised crowd. The assistants can only guess about the reasons for such strange behavior of the head of the guild. Craig, meanwhile, runs without looking back, hoping to catch up with a valuable ally. The head runs to the park and begins to search for Sean throughout the territory. But neither on the park benches nor on the square in the center, the guy is visible. Craig realizes that he missed the protagonist and takes one last look around the square. Finally, he turns around and begins his journey back to the gate from which he recently emerged. Craig's assistants catch up with their boss and ask for an explanation of what happened. The head of the guild orders his assistants to urgently search for one person, and the main character, completely sure that every participant in the sortie to the dungeon has forgotten about him, calmly continues his way home. Back at the guild headquarters, Lucy immediately starts searching for information about Sean. She managed to find out that the main character went underground again a few hours ago. Craig thanks the girl for such an effective and fast work. Lucy asks the head of the guild to explain why he is so interested in a low-ranking assistant. But Craig is sure that the appearance of a nondescript boy is deceptive. The head leans back in his chair and reflects on the mysterious assistant from the dungeon. He thinks that if he hadn't used the reckoning skill of such a high level, nothing would have betrayed the boy's extraordinary abilities. Craig firmly decides to recruit the main character into his guild. The head looks down at his hand and remembers the unusual sensations of immense power emanating from the swords created by Sean. He had never experienced anything like this before. Katanas were not only skillfully created, this also allowed Craig to use his destructive abilities to the fullest. The head of the guild has seen many gunsmiths and tried hundreds of swords. He came to different countries to blacksmiths, who were called the greatest in their business. Craig was always attentive to the choice of weapons, and his requirements were high. Each blacksmith was confident in the quality of his products. Usually they assured that the product would withstand any inspections. Craig carefully tested every sample that came into his hands. He even brought weak monsters with him to be tested in close-to-combat conditions. But each time, the guildmaster was disappointed with the weapons on offer. With undisguised dissatisfaction, he returned the test samples back to the blacksmiths. After all, each of the swords provided for testing did not pass the test and was destroyed after using the skill of the guild leader. Each of the blacksmiths was shocked by the failure. They literally tore their hair out, and Craig left empty-handed, hoping to finally find at least one suitable sword elsewhere. Rumor has it that one of the blacksmiths even stopped practicing the craft, unable to withstand the shame. But the weapon created by the main character was different from everything else. The head of the guild would not believe it if he did not see with his own eyes how the guy creates unsurpassed blades with amazing characteristics. Craig sighs heavily and asks Lucy what's left on his schedule for today. The girl mentions a meeting with the head of another guild, but the man asks to postpone the event because he is going to leave early. In the wilderness, far from the city, a new gate to the dungeon opens. This time, huge bloodthirsty orcs await the heroes behind the portal. The knight strikes one of the monsters on the spot, using just a few swings. The tank is extremely surprised by the quality of the weapon created by the assistant. The sword, which was made by a nondescript boy, easily coped with the weapon of even the boss of the dungeon. Sean himself, as always, collects crystals mana away from the raging battle. The knight cannot get enough of the skillful work of the main character. Tank says that he has never seen such a high-quality sword, examines the weapon from all sides. He sincerely thanks his assistant for the blade, which helped the whole team out a lot. The knight offers to recruit such a valuable boy into his guild, and the sorceress supports the idea. It seems to them that the guy deserves more than just to remain a helper with a paltry reward for each dungeon. The main character hears this chatter and is distracted from his business. He thinks that he spent more mana than he planned, because the group can hardly cope with even a low-level dungeon. Sean recalls his first outing, in which he became a gambler. At the moment of the battle with the golem, the hero felt a huge reserve of mana. He could not even imagine that this could happen. But all of it was spent on the destruction of the monster, and has not been replenished since. Therefore now Sean feels only a small reserve of mana, which corresponds to his level. The hero is glad that he got new memories of the future, and now there are no problems with the creation of weapons. After all, the quality of the created item is determined by the amount of mana spent. Another way to improve the quality of manufactured weapons is to study the principles of their creation in the real world. The hero remembers how much he trained after he learned that you can reach new heights by learning weapons. And the training was not in vain. Sean received a tenfold return. After all, he uses mana much more efficiently. Otherwise, his reserves would not be enough to create high-level weapons. Nevertheless, the hero decides that he needs to work on increasing the amount of mana, because the reckoning skill also takes a fairly large amount of it. Although there is equipment in the world that can increase the supply of magical energy, it costs a lot of money and is not available to the hero. Sean can only afford mana potions, which have at least some effect on the state of affairs. The hero checks his balance and notes that with the salary of an assistant, it will be difficult to order even potions. Sean also checks the mana fill bar for the quest. He is not satisfied with the low efficiency, only 1% per dungeon. Thanks to dungeons with errors in ranks, the hero received much more mana from high-level opponents. But it is impossible to understand what rank the dungeon is until you enter it. For example, the last sortie would have been much more difficult without Craig's help. Sean decides that he needs to look for a dungeon with a suitable boss in order to get the quest reward as soon as possible. Finally, the crew comes out of the gates and the captain thanks everyone for their good work. The hero stays at the exit for a while to check if everything went according to plan. The reckoning skill kicks in, and the whole group forgets about the assistant's miraculous abilities to create weapons. Suddenly, the main character is called by name from behind his back. The guy thinks that the reckoning could still misfire. He turns around nervously, trying to come up with a solution to the problem. But it is the head of the guild and his assistant who are quickly approaching the hero. Craig greets Sean, and the guy realizes that the reckoning did not help erase the memory of the experience awakened after all. The main character jokes that he sees a man for the first time. But Craig asks the guy not to run away and listen because the offer is really worthwhile. The guild leader holds out a black and red business card with the organization's logo. Sean takes the business card in his hands and carefully peers at a small piece of plastic. On the card, only the name of the guild and its logo flaunt. But this is enough for the hero to understand that we are talking about one of the best guilds in the country. Sean understands that it is too early for him to join such a large organization and wants to politely refuse. But the guy only manages to turn around sharply and unintelligibly say that he does not have time and he needs to hurry. Craig grabs the hero tightly by the shoulder. He says that the guy will not regret the conversation. In addition, the conversation will not take much time, and the head promises to treat you to dinner. Sean notes that the head of such a famous guild has too much free time to spend it on such low-level awakens. Finally, the main character agrees to a conversation and asks him not to detain him unnecessarily. Craig can't help but smile contentedly. He expects a lot from dinner, and he promises not to waste the precious time of the main character. The car stops at an establishment in the traditional Asian style. Craig and Lucy sit opposite the main character at a table set with expensive delicacies. Sean starts a conversation. He asks the head of the guild to go straight to the point of the meeting, and he clarifies that he does not understand why one of the best guilds in the country needed some ordinary assistant. Craig begins to explain why he invited the protagonist to a conversation. The specialization of the guild leader is a berserker, and he needs a weapon that can withstand huge loads in battle. The chapter tells about his wanderings around the world in search of the perfect sword. He even appealed to skilled creators of magical weapons. But the result has always remained the same, regardless of the quality of the product or the level of magic. All the blades were not able to withstand the guild leader's ability and broke in his hands. Craig says he's met only one exception after a long search. He again remembers meeting the main character in the dungeon. And he says that the only sword that survived the enhancement was the blade created by the main character. Sean silently listens to the chapter, silently noting to himself that he needs to be careful with the use of the payback skill, because in this case, it did not work at all. The protagonist leans on a table, waiting for the end of Craig's story. The head of the guild takes a sip of tea and finally decides to say why he called Sean. The man offers the hero to join the Overkill organization. Lucy can't believe her ears because the boss offers a huge salary to some assistant. Craig voices the conditions: an excellent salary, coverage of all expenses, and a contract for a year. But the main character does not listen to the head of the guild and interrupts him in mid-sentence. Sean gets up from the table and says that he is not going to join any guild yet. He thanks you for a delicious dinner and says that it's time for him to go. Craig tries to stop the hero, but he already leaves the room and does not listen to the chapter. Lucy is surprised by such a generous offer from the boss. She asks what prompted him to voice such conditions. Craig explains that the girl just didn't see how good the boy's weapons were. The head says that he has not experienced such a feeling of unity with the blade for a long time. With such a weapon, it seemed to him that he was capable of anything. But he notes that the purpose of the proposal was also financial gain. Lucy realizes that the head of the guild is spending fabulous sums on weapons that constantly break. But Craig has no choice because he needs swords to use the skill. The girl admits that with such a benefit, the amount for the contract seems even small. Craig continues to wonder where else he can find such a weaponsmith. And he comes to the conclusion that so far he knows only one suitable candidate. That is why he is going not to stop in his attempts and recruit Sean to the guild at any cost, whatever the hero wishes in return. The protagonist returns home and thinks he didn't expect to receive an offer from one of the best guilds so early. He thinks that with such a salary he could afford better equipment, but decides to be patient and wait for now. A huge hall, similar to a medieval arena, is covered with bloodstains and fog. Around lie the defeated goblins, low-level monsters, but the main danger in the dungeon does not come from small green-skinned pests. The knight looks at the man standing in front of him and demands to explain himself. A mysterious opponent sticks his huge sword into the awakened one lying on the floor. A sinister smile appears on his face, and he says that usually people beg not to kill them, rather than asking stupid questions. The knight decides that he is an ordinary marauder who steals from low-level groups. But Jack replies that he doesn't want to spend extra energy explaining his motives. But he is ready to share information if the knight can win the duel. The swordsman thinks that he has no chance at a distance and analyzes the weaknesses of the opponent. Screaming, the knight runs at Jack, trying to close the distance and strike. Both warriors raise their swords, trying to attack each other. Their blades cross, striking sparks. Jack only smiles in the face of his opponent. The knight struggles to overpower his opponent and thinks over his next move. Finally, the tank goes on the attack. It decides to inflict the maximum number of blows it is capable of. Jack fights off every lunge without much effort. It seems that he is getting bored. Finally, the villain knocks the sword out of the knight's hands. The blade twists and flies high up. Taking advantage of the guy's confusion, Jack kicks him in the stomach so hard that the poor guy flies to the other end of the hall. The knight is holding his stomach. He was lucky that he survived such an attack and escaped with only a few fractures. But Jack is about to correct this oversight. He walks towards the tank, dragging his heavy sword across the floor. The guy's nerves give out, and he begins to beg the villain for mercy. Tears flow down his cheeks, and his body trembles with fear and pain. A smile spreads across the face of the cruel hero killer. He raises his huge sword over the knight. Despite the weight of the gun, Jack finishes off his opponent with a slight movement, blowing off his head. Finally, there is not a single living creature left in the hall. except for Jack himself, goblins and people lying on the floor mixed together, most of them torn to pieces. The villain is disappointed with such a quick ending. He hoped that for the first time in a long time, he would find an equal opponent. Jack pays attention to the expression on the severed head of the enemy. The villain begins to talk to the corpses of the enemies. Later, he takes a mobile phone out of his cloak pocket and promises to tell everyone that the knight bravely fought the boss. Jack begins to photograph the remains of enemies, saying that such losses are common for a dungeon with a mistaken rank. The villain looks through the resulting photos with a maniacal smile. Several shots turned out especially well. He loves to collect things, and photographs with defeated enemies are perhaps his favorite item in the collection. From viewing the gallery, the villain is distracted by an unexpected feeling. His whole body is twitching. He has noticed the presence of vile energy and asks the wearer to either hide his aura or come out and not hide. A tall, slender girl enters the dungeon. She easily opens the heavy gates, and a strange glow surrounds her body. Jack says that he was not mistaken when he asked the head not to rush with this dungeon, because nothing useful appeared here. Karen turns his head and asks the villain how he dares to contradict the executioner. Jack quickly changes the subject and asks the girl to clean up the dungeon, and the witch begins to use her magical energy. At the end of the dialogue, the villain reminds Karen of his promise to give him a hero of the highest rank to be torn to pieces. Continuing the demonic ritual, the girl says that she will keep her word and will soon contact Jack. A bright light begins to emanate from the wound on the body of the defeated knight. A few moments later, a clawed paw appears from there, clearly belonging to some monster. Karen looks at the monster in front of her, her mouth breaking into a happy smile, her cheeks flushing as if she saw some funny and cute animal. The girl is very pleased with the summoning. This time she managed to get an excellent demon at her disposal, and the result exceeded her expectations. A crowd of onlookers gathered at the next gate that opened in the city. Several guards keep people at a safe distance. The main character, who is going on a new sortie into the dungeon, sees a familiar figure among the participants. This is Craig. He tried to hide his identity with ordinary clothes and a black mask. For a few seconds, the characters look at each other in awkward silence. Each does not know what to say to him. Finally, Sean asks the guild leader the purpose of his visit to the low-level gate. Craig praises the hero's insight, hoping that the disguise would deceive everyone around him, and he would be able to keep his identity a secret. And Sean advises the head of the guild to stop walking around with such a conspicuous suitcase for weapons, because no one carries inventory in this way. The protagonist learns that Craig is still going to enter a low-ranking gate under the pretext that he is replacing a suddenly sick guild member. The conversation is interrupted by a member of the team who announces the beginning of the sortie and asks everyone to enter the gate. Craig responds and moves to the portal, inviting the hero to follow him. Sean didn't expect the guild master to continue his attempts to recruit the protagonist so quickly and decides that the plan needs to be adjusted. The team enters the gate. They are greeted by a huge but unremarkable cave. While the hunters are looking around, Craig again begins to offer the hero to join the guild. Sean is surprised by the guild leader's straightforwardness and begins to get annoyed. The hero says that he has already refused and does not want to raise this topic anymore because he does not need the guild. The guy hears the conversation of the team members in front. They are discussing an expensive gate, the auction house for which a large guild has won again. Craig notices the guy's interest in the high-level gate and decides to use it as leverage. The head of the guild calls out to Sean and says that winning the auction for a high-level dungeon is not easy. But if the hero joins the Overkill Guild, then he will have access to gates of any level. Sean realizes that in their world, the name and reputation of the guild that the hunter is a member of can work wonders. Each organization has its own crowd of fans and envious people who idolize or hate guild members. The salary and number of rewards for completing dungeons also depends on the guild level. And members of popular large organizations receive not only expanded responsibilities, but also rights. For example, they may receive passes to especially rare gates that are inaccessible to ordinary awakened people. Naturally, the rewards in such dungeons are strikingly different from the rest and open up new opportunities not only in financial terms. Craig says that anyone who is awakened should strive for their goal, and by joining the Overkill Guild, Sean will be able to achieve incredible heights. But the main character is adamant. He again refuses to join Craig's guild like any other. The head of the guild is surprised by the hero's words, because any awakened would do anything to join such a famous and powerful corporation. Craig silently looks after the main character, trying to understand why he so stubbornly refuses to join anywhere. The head of the guild suggests that the guy has good reasons for refusing, and perhaps one of them is the recent loss of allies at the gate with a mistake. The group continues to move deeper into the cave. The magical girl Anita illuminates the path with her staff. Andrew, a swordsman boy, unexpectedly falls into a thick web that hung above his head. The sorceress raises her staff higher, and the group sees the ceiling of the cave dotted with cobwebs. The group commander John asks everyone to stay on the alert, because then the territory of monsters begins. Intelligence reported that the dungeon was inhabited by about 6 spiders of the Legion, which pose a threat only in large numbers, but not one at a time. The captain adds that the spider's fangs contain paralytic venom, while Craig prepares the weapon. The guildmaster asks Sean to stay away from enemies who are about to attack, but the main character asks not to worry about him and calmly prepare for battle. Craig disagrees, believing that all team members should protect support hunters. The conversation is interrupted by a sharp sound echoing in the cavern. The whole team peers into the darkness, trying to see the opponents. Hundreds of sharp paws covered with steel appendages knock on the floor and ceiling of the cave, heading towards the heroes. These are the spiders of the Legion, who want not only to protect their lair, but also to feast on fresh human meat. At the sight of dozens of monsters, Andrew begins to tremble all over his body and tries to calm himself. Spiders are inexorably approaching their prey. Up close, the monsters seem simply huge. Finally, the pack attacks the team. Poison spurts from their jaws in all directions, and the heroes are quickly surrounded. Andrew slices the first enemy in half. The spider had the imprudence to jump onto the shield covering the hero. A second later, the swordsman dispatches another huge insect, green blood splattering the walls of the cave. The monsters seem not to notice the obstacles in the form of the tank's shield, strengthened by a magical skill, and continue to attack the team. The tank uses the knockback ability, and the spider carcasses fly to the other end of the cave. Anita wastes no time. She raises her staff above her head and prepares to cast the spell. A beam of lightning flies out of the magic wand, heading towards the enemy. Spiders have no resistance to magic. Their weak defenses and low health leave them no chance of survival. Craig does not enter the fight yet and is relieved to see that the team is doing a good job against the enemy, despite the rather low level of hunters. The head is distracted from his thoughts by Sean's exclamation, who saw something in the depths of the cave. This is a new horde of monsters quickly heading towards the team with the obvious intention of destroying the brazen humans. The spiders flank the group from behind, trying to attack the uncovered flank, where there are only 2 heroes. Craig puts the weapon on alert. The blade of the sword is covered in flames. The head of the guild controls the fire, which cuts through the carcasses of insects like a blade. One attack by Craig destroys 12 spiders, and their charred bodies fall to the floor of the cave with a thud. The head continues his attacks. He is pleased that the enemies are quite weak. After all, Craig does not even have to use a sword in battle. He only needs the energy of the skill to fight the enemy. The head hears a cry for help and interrupts his next attack to understand what has happened. Insects have surrounded the rest of the group, which cannot cope with so many monsters at once. Tank curses the scouts, who warned of far fewer monsters in the dungeon. The swordsman and the sorceress are fighting with the last of their strength. The sorceress has almost spent all her mana on previous attacks. Craig understands that the hunters will not last long at this pace, and he needs to help his allies. The head of the guild asks Sean to follow him so that the guy does not fall into the clutches of monsters. But the main character asks Craig not to be distracted and help the rest of the team while the hero himself deals with the rest. One of the spiders jumps and is about to attack Sean from above. Craig thinks that the main character will soon come to an end because he will not be able to dodge the sharp jaws of the monster. But Sean freezes in place and closes his eyes, as if he has lost the remnants of the instinct of self-preservation. Finally, the protagonist opens his eyes, which are filled with a bright blue glow, a clear sign of mana use. The spider suddenly hovers in the air, not understanding what prevents him from reaching his goal. An energy dagger is stabbed into the monster's back. It slices through the insect's body, leaving a huge wound. Craig does not believe in what is happening, because just a second ago, the main character was threatened with imminent death. The spider's body falls under Sean's feet, almost splattering the vile-looking guy with green blood. The protagonist thinks that the most effective tactic would be to create some swords and quickly deal with the horde of monsters. However, his mana limitations will not allow him to maintain multiple blades at once, so he will only control one. A long ball of energy appears from the hero's finger, which obeys Sean's will. At the end of the clot is a one-handed sword, also consisting of mana. The hero stands calmly in the center of the cave, controlling his deadly weapon with only the movements of his hand. The blade approaches the spiders, attacking the hero at great speed. The created weapon easily pierces through insects, leaving huge holes in their bodies. An improvised whip strikes monsters faster and faster as Sean wields the weapon. The protagonist feels invincible by standing right in the middle of the battlefield and taking no damage. He thinks that he could not have dreamed of such power, even after he became awake. Finally, the flow of monsters dries up, and the walls of the cave are brightly lit by an energy whip rushing in all directions. Craig can't say a word as he watches a show put on by an unremarkable low-level kid. Sean is very pleased with the result. He thanks the system that chose him as a player and gave him such unusual abilities. The main character finishes off the last spider that was hiding among the corpses of his relatives. Craig digests what he has just seen and tries to figure out where the assistant has abilities that can attack in an area. Finally, having finished the bloody battle, the main character recalls the sword and it begins to dissolve into thin air. Sean reminds Craig that in fact, the rest of the team is still in mortal danger, and the head of the guild should urgently move to the aid of the allies. After all, the team is fighting with the last of their strength, and the horde of insects does not seem to be decreasing in number. Craig instantly activates the Berserker's abilities and says that he wants to ask the protagonist a few questions after completing the dungeon. Sean asks the head of the guild to pretend that he destroyed the rest of the spiders, because no one will believe that some assistant could do it anyway. Continuing towards the rest of the group, Craig agrees to fulfill the protagonist's request. After a few minutes, the fight is finally over. The corpses and cocoons of giant spiders smoldering on the cave floor after the powerful attacks of the Berserker. The group commander thanks Craig for saving their lives and says that he did not expect to see the head of such a famous guild in a dungeon of such a low level. Craig apologizes for trying to hide his identity and explains that he just wanted to calmly explore the gate without drawing too much attention. The sorceress suddenly interrupts the head of the guild and asks him to accept sincere gratitude for saving the team. The girl blushes and says that Craig's massacre of spiders was just unbelievable, and she would be very happy to be photographed with such a famous person as a keepsake. The heroes turn to the sound of voices that can be heard behind their backs. They are Sean and Andrew, who have set out to explore the cave in search of useful resources. They managed to collect all the valuables and make sure that there were no monsters left nearby. But they also managed to find a passage that leads even deeper into the cave, and Andrew offers to explore it. But the group commander does not agree to such an adventure. He believes that the hunters have little strength left, and the sortie will be too risky. In addition, intelligence has already made a mistake about the number of spiders in the dungeon. It is not known what to expect in the depths of the cave. Moreover, the gates exist separately from the earth, and the logic of the dungeons is very different from the usual reality. Despite the fact that the dungeons are carefully studied, to this day their principles are still not exactly known. Not every hunter can adapt inside dungeons on the spot. Usually such an experience ends in death. Therefore, people began to resort to the help of scouts, specially trained awakened people. They are hunters with camouflage or tracking skills that allow them to remain undetected. After such exploration, the level of the dungeon can change dramatically, depending on the data obtained. Scouts have become an extremely important link in the chain of interaction between the awakened and the gate. John says that the accuracy of the intelligence, although great, never reaches 100%, so it is quite possible that the dungeon that the team entered is also misranked. Andrew modestly suggests that they continue to explore the gate because an experienced hunter is fighting on the side of the team. The captain insists on his own. It is dangerous to continue. It is not known what may be waiting in the depths of the caves, especially since even with the head of the guild, any of the crew can lose their life due to negligence. The swordsman begs the commander, motivating the desire to complete the dungeon with his personal goals. The tank continues to doubt the expediency of continuing the sortie. No treasure is worth life. Anita joins Andrew. She also wants to reach the end of the caves and get a valuable reward that may be hiding in the boss room. John's speech is interrupted by the head of the guild. Craig himself declares that he is also ready to continue the journey. The man says that he has come to explore the dungeon completely and perhaps he will be able to find something interesting in the room with the boss. The head says that the coordinated actions of the group will surely lead them to victory, and there is no need to worry. John bows low and thanks the experienced hunter for believing in the team's strength and agreeing to continue the sortie. Tank adds that he is naturally ready to hand over leadership to Craig on demand, but the head of the guild asks John to continue to manage the team because he is doing a great job. The knight agrees and suggests that the team move out to explore the trail they found earlier. The group continues their journey through the dark chambers of the cave, the sorceress looking back dreamily at Craig along the way. The cave turns out to be much larger than it seemed at first glance, but at least the team does not stumble upon hordes of terrible spiders. Finally, the group comes to a massive gate, apparently leading to the boss room. John stops to give out the last instructions before a tough fight with the monster. Judging by the intelligence information, the Spider Queen of the Legion is waiting for the team ahead. It is a huge spider that is able to control its subjects. Despite her size, the queen is considered a fairly simple boss, her main function being to give birth to the spiders of the Legion. John puts his hands on the door to the room and adds that he can expect anything, because the intelligence could be wrong. Finally, the tank begins to open the massive doors of the room. A thin strip of light bursts into the room from the outside, but so far it's pitch dark inside and I can't make out anything. The sorceress uses her staff to illuminate the room and assess the situation. Craig listens carefully to the sensations and does not feel anything unusual. Moreover, he does not feel even the slightest sign of the boss or monsters inside the room. But the team finds the queen. John orders the team to get ready and raises his shield. The monster looms menacingly over the hunters as the Legion's spiders approach within attack range. The sorceress is glad that this time the intelligence gave accurate data and the boss turned out to be the queen. The girl decides to attack first. Mana energy begins to emanate from her staff. An electric discharge breaks from the end of the wand and flies towards the spiders. The attack is so powerful that it sweeps the boss's subordinates out of the way, turning smaller monsters into ashes. Anita rejoices. She is pleased that she managed to destroy so many opponents in just one spell. But her joy is replaced by surprise when she notices something strange. The queen is already dead. Her entire body is covered with huge wounds. A huge piece of her body is missing. John does not understand how the boss was already dead if the team had just entered the room. Sensing something is wrong, the tank turns around and orders to urgently leave the dungeon. Before he can finish speaking, the whole group feels an unusual energy that has appeared in the room. The knight barely suppresses the desire to escape from the dungeon in panic. All his feelings are replaced by animal fear. A huge purple paw descends on the body of the defeated queen with a thud. In the shadow of the room was another monster that had successfully concealed its presence. This spider-like monster is several times larger than the queen and looks more like a cross between a man and a giant spider. The monster turns out to be Arachne, the mistress of all spiders, who has a fairly high intelligence and the ability to control all types of spider-type monsters. The team looks on with horror at the boss who suddenly appears. His level far exceeds the group's abilities. Arachne decides to crush the hunters with a single blow of her huge paw. But he stumbles upon an obstacle that saves people from certain death. It is Craig who has activated his berserker skills, who is repelling the attack with his sword. The head of the guild does not understand how a monster of such a high rank ended up in the dungeon. Arachne's armor is strong, and without the ability to use a sword, not even a scratch can be left on it. The monster didn't expect to meet such fierce resistance from the hunters. Craig wastes no time in attacking. He needs to deal as much damage as possible before the sword falls apart. But he fails to deliver a fatal blow. The blade cannot withstand the load and crumbles into fragments. The head of the guild finds himself in the unenviable position of interrupting in the middle of an attack in the air and is unable to dodge Arachne's lunge. Sean comes to Craig's aid, activating the crafting skill. The main character blocks the boss's blow with a blade that will serve as a temporary weapon for the guild leader. The guy asks Craig to stall for time while the hero tries to create a suitable sword to fight a formidable opponent. Being a smart monster, Arachne realizes that she needs to switch her attention to Sean. The protagonist finishes creating a temporary blade for the guild leader. The hero barely has time to finish and feels that his strength is leaving his body. He had spent quite a lot of mana in previous battles and now it was completely gone. In this case, Sean took a bottle of mana with him, which instantly replenishes the reserves. The only condition for the use of such potions is that you can drink them only once a day. Otherwise, addiction arises and the hunter can no longer do without a new dose. Despite the limitations, the vial charges the hero even better than he expected. Sean looks back at the confused team who don't know how to counter a monster of this rank. The main character thinks that they are lucky. Without Craig, everything could have turned out much sadder. Arachne easily dealt with the Spider Queen of the Legion on her own and would not leave a wet spot from low-level hunters. But the head of the guild is able to at least restrain the attacks of a monster of this level. Arachne continues the onslaught with a sinister smile, her paws delivering blow after blow with impressive speed. But Craig is fully focused and successfully resists the monster's attacks with the help of a sword created by Sean. The main character orders the team to prepare for a battle with Arachne because she can change targets at any second. John does not understand why so much self-confidence comes from a low-ranking assistant. Andrew and Anita are also confused. After all, the guy turned out to be an extremely powerful hunter. But the main character does not explain anything, only mentions that it would be better for the team to concentrate. After all, they are already being attacked by hordes of Legion spiders, whose questions alone cannot be stopped. Sean activates the weapon crafting skill, and streams of energy burst out of his palm. The main character invites the team to choose their fate on their own. The guy creates a weapon for each of them that corresponds to the class of the group members, and they either take up arms and defend themselves from a horde of monsters, or they cowardly try to save their lives and run to the exit from the dungeon. Fortunately, all team members choose to stay and accept the fight. The swordsman has already grabbed a new weapon and remains delighted with the sword. He had never held such high-level equipment in his hands before. The sword allows the guy to deal with attacking spiders with incredible ease. The blade tears through the flesh of monsters as if it were passing through oil rather than the carcasses of monsters from the dungeon. Remembering that the main character has created a new weapon for each of the team members, the swordsman checks how the others are doing. Anita stares at her new staff, fascinated. The girl could not even dream of such power. With a smile, she raises her wand above her head and releases the accumulated energy at her opponents. Dozens of lightning strikes the spiders from the ceiling of the cave, leaving the monsters no chance to even run to the group, let alone attack. John is surprised to think that the team's skills are significantly dependent on the level of equipment, because only the weapons in the hands of allies have changed. But their strength has increased several dozen times, and ordinary spiders no longer pose the slightest danger. John cannot understand what is hidden behind the personality of the main character, who volunteered to go to the dungeon as a simple assistant. Craig is breathing heavily despite his experience. He is already pretty tired of holding back Arachne's powerful attacks. He thinks he'll be able to hold off attacks for a while longer, but even his strength won't be enough to do more without the right weapon. Arachne took so much damage that even her teeth began to crumble. The monster's entire body is covered in deep wounds, from which green blood oozes. Craig decides to finish off the boss as quickly as possible and activates the Berserker skill. He accelerates and launches an attack, hoping to deliver the final blow that will take Arachne's life. The guild leader jumps high and attacks the monster, giving it his all. Craig manages to cut off the monster's head, and the lifeless monster falls to the floor. The man thinks that he is lucky, because the blade could easily break after such a release of energy. Looking at the sword out of the corner of his eye, Craig notices that the spiders have become unusually animated. The monsters stopped attacking the team and began to run in one direction. The guildmaster realizes what is happening and orders the group to retreat. Arachne activated the ability, and the situation had just become even more complicated than it had been before the imaginary victory. The spiders of the Legion begin to cling to the boss's body and sacrifice themselves. Gradually, Arachne's wounds heal. The skill is so powerful that even lost limbs are restored. A few seconds later, the boss manages to get up from the ground. A smile reappears on the monster's face. Craig analyzes the situation, watching Arachne literally rise from the dead. The head understands that until the team deals with all the spiders, the boss will be restored over and over again. Craig decides to increase his firepower in order to dispatch all the spiders of the Legion in one swing. But the blade of the sword cannot withstand the load and small cracks appear at its end. The head swears even with such a minor flaw, it will not be possible to continue the attack. The main character smiles and says that he did not expect such power from Craig. He explains that although he created the sword from the rest of his mana, He still did not think that the head would be able to break it. Fortunately, the hero has finished creating a real weapon worthy of battle. This sword, although not one-handed, is the strongest that the hero has managed to create so far. The guild leader grips the handle of his new sword tightly and instantly feels all the power hidden in the blade. Craig thinks that he is able to destroy anyone with one blow. The sword allows the leader not to restrain himself in the skills of a berserker. The floor cracks from the release of energy under the man. Craig says that although he is not an expert in greatswords, this one seems to suit him. The eyes of the head are filled with glow, the blade is engulfed in raging flames. He jumps high and raises his sword before the final attack that will end not only Arachne, but also her pathetic minions. At the moment of the attack, Craig himself looks like a demon from hell, bringing only destruction to this world. The temperature in the epicenter of the fight is so high that it seems as if the boss's face is melting. Finally, Craig strikes and a flood of energy tears Arachne's body in half, tearing through and burning the spiders of the Legion. The protagonist carefully watches the spectacle. He learns that Craig used the basic skill of a berserker. And most likely, this is the first time that the head has managed to realize the full potential of the skill. Craig's entire body is engulfed in flames, as is the huge sword clutched in his right hand. Using the skill carries risks, because the berserker is instantly deprived of weapons if they are too low level. The guild leader freezes in place. Even streams of flame begin to come out of his mouth. And then there is an explosion in the center of the room, as if someone had planted a bomb in a cave. Finally, the flames begin to slowly subside. The flashes become smaller and smaller. The sword in the hands of the head is already barely burning. The green blood of Arachne is caked on it. Craig thinks he's taken a big risk, because if he hadn't released all the energy, he could have gone crazy. He looks at the excellently crafted sword and thinks that this is only the second time he has fully used the skill since waking up. The guildmaster realizes that he was very wrong when he thought that Sean was only creating great weapons. Now he is sure that the main character is not at all an ordinary awakened. The attention of the whole world will be riveted on such an outstanding hunter. The heroes silently look at the huge body of the defeated boss, the remains of which are still smoldering after Craig's attack. Sean looks up and notices why he volunteered to go to the dungeon. This is the infected mana that the protagonist needs so much to complete the tasks of the system. Sean decides to proceed cautiously and first asks the head of the guild a question. The hero wonders if Craig feels any energy emanating from the corpse. Craig replies that he doesn't feel anything, and this time he is sure that Arachne is definitely dead. Sean likes the chapter's answer, as it means that even high-ranking hunters don't feel this type of mana. Therefore, the guy can absorb the energy he needs to move through the quest without fear of running into questions. The interface notifies the hero that he has collected the necessary amount of mana for the reward. And now Sean has access to the skill of creating demonic weapons, which is also saved when crafted. The main character cannot even imagine how powerful such equipment will be. He wonders if such equipment is known in his world. The interface shows that Arachne made it possible to collect half of the mana required for the second reward. Craig interrupts the main character from his thoughts by loudly pronouncing his name. The head asks Sean to listen to him because the man has something to say. The guy begins to ask what happened, but does not have time to finish his question. Craig begins to bow and apologize for so persistently inviting the hero to join the guild. The man says that he should not have shown such pressure because the guy had already refused once. The main character cannot understand what came over the head of the guild. Sean expected anything but not an apology. The guy asked to stop bowing because he is not used to such behavior of others. John cannot believe his eyes. He stands with his mouth open, unable to utter a word. The knight cannot believe that the head of such a large guild bows his head to an ordinary assistant. John thinks that most likely Sean is hiding his identity because the guy has outstanding powers. The tank turns around to check where the rest of the team is. Andrew and Anita have been checking the room for monsters and valuable loot and report that everything is clean. Andrew praises the blade created by Sean. With such a weapon, it is a pleasure to destroy monsters. Anita agrees with her friend. She has never met such an experienced gunsmith. But John immediately interrupts the discussion and says that it's time for the team to leave the dungeon and contact the association for a report. Andrew and Anita do not understand why there is such a rush, especially since the girl wanted to thank the head of the guild and Sean for their help. But John literally pushes the guys to the exit, demanding to leave this disgusting place. Tank simply does not want to interfere in the affairs of such a large guild so as not to get into trouble. Finally, the protagonist agrees to listen to Craig. But first, he asks you to stop bowing, because this is inappropriate behavior for a person of this status. Moreover, he is facing an ordinary low-level assistant. Craig says he understands that the hero doesn't care about joining a guild or working with the head himself. But he still asks to accept the tempting conditions that the head of the guild offers to the guy. The protagonist arrives at the majestic Overkill Guild building. Lucy greets the guy and says she's glad to see him again. She introduces herself as the secretary of the Overkill Guild and is responsible for making the contract. Sean thanks the girl for her work and says that he did not expect such a quick meeting. Lucy explains that the head asked not to delay the question and to have everything ready for the morning. The signing of the contract will take place in a special reception room of the guild, where you do not have to worry about the confidentiality of the process. The girl invites the main character to familiarize himself with the contract, which repeats the conditions voiced by the chapter in the dungeon. Sean reads the contract carefully to make sure that the terms are real. He smiles contentedly. As the guildmaster said, on paper the proposal seems much more convincing. Finally, the hero puts the contract back on the table and confirms his agreement. In the dungeon, Craig offered to get a job in the guild, not quite officially. He understands the need for the protagonist to hide his identity, although not completely. But the head of the guild promises to provide Sean with equipment, ingredients, and rights to the gate. The main character clarifies how he deserves such generosity from one of the largest guilds. Craig voices only one condition in exchange for the privileges granted: the completion of special tasks. At the same time, the head does not insist on the unconditional obedience of the protagonist. First of all, the conclusion of a contract is necessary so that the guy cannot join another guild. The heroes finish discussing the deal, but their conversation is interrupted by the approaching sound of footsteps. This is a squad of the Hunters Association, which has come to make sure that everything is fine with the head of the guild. The chapter says that it's time to end the discussion and moves to the exit from the dungeon. He hopes that the hero will accept the offer because Berserk really wants to get such a powerful ally. In general, Sean's plan worked as expected. The guy wanted to impress the head of the guild and continue to work with Overkill without joining the organization. Lucy reports that the protagonist can request everything he needs from the moment he signs the contract. She pulls out a small case from her purse, which Craig asks to give as a gift. The hero takes the box in his hands and wonders what may be inside. He opens the gift. A magical purple glow emanates from the case. Sean looks inside, his expression betraying no emotion. He thanks Lucy for the gift and quickly puts the box in his backpack. Along the way, the hero takes out a tablet with papers on which a list of items he needs is printed. The girl studies the list of requested equipment, not hiding her surprise. Lucy says that the list is quite large, and it will take at least a week to find and get everything you need. But the girl notes that such items are unlikely to be useful to a hunter with the specialization of the main character. The guy says that he does not ask for everything from the list for himself. He wants to give some equipment to someone else. In the afternoon, the hero arrives at the Hunters Association to find one girl and implement a cunning plan. The office of the association is already half empty. Hunters prefer to solve their business in the morning or in the evening, after sorties. Sean looks at the screen of his smartphone with displeasure. He constantly checks the time. The hero thinks that the one he is waiting for should have come a long time ago, and it is strange that she is delayed. Finally, Sean looks up and notices the girl he wanted to talk to. She embarrassedly enters the building of the association, as if she is afraid to look into someone's eyes or accidentally hurt someone. A beam of energy breaks through the trees and foliage in the quiet summer forest. It punches huge holes not only in the wood, but also in the bodies of ogres that are unlucky enough to be on the way. This is the archer goddess Lexi, and the beam of energy exuded an arrow shot by the girl at the enemies. It is in the future that Lexi becomes a player and reveals her talent. Now the girl can barely find the strength to talk to the office staff. Finally, Lexi squeezes out the words. She turns to the two clerks sitting at the table. Embarrassed and not stuttering, the girl asks for a training pass to the gate. She places her hunter ID card on the counter. The clerk checks the document and offers Lexi a C-rank gate, as the huntress is an A-rank. Further embarrassed, she clarifies that she would like to get a D-level gate pass. Such a request confuses the clerks, because hunters of such a high level do not use low-level dungeons. In his mind, the clerk thinks that this is the first time he has seen an awakened with such a skill who has made only a few sorties. Finally, the girl is asked to fill out a document confirming the request for a training pass. And the office employee thinks that most likely Lexi will soon be demoted. As the energy poured through the cracks in the sky, it penetrated all the people. The amount of mana stored in the body determines how powerful the hunter's abilities will be. This is how the division of the awakened into ranks appeared. The more mana, the higher the rating. At the same time, ranks are not a static value. They can rise and fall depending on the successes or failures of a particular awakened person. For example, if Lexi continues to go only to low-level dungeons, she will soon be demoted. An office employee accepts the application and checks the correctness of filling out the paper. Lexi asks if it is possible to go to the dungeon alone and what will be needed for this. The secretary replies that only a group of 2 people is allowed to enter the gate, but the hunter can pass the challenge for a single pass. The girl is horrified at the thought of passing the test and immediately refuses. Clerk remembers wanting to remind Lexi of the standard association procedure. The secretary tells the hunter that she will have a rank update at the end of the month. To confirm rank A, Lexi must either complete a C-level dungeon or an A-level challenge. An employee of the association advises the girl to choose a test, the invitation to which will come automatically, and wishes her good luck. Sean watches from the sidelines, listens attentively, pretending to stare at his phone. Leaving the building, Lexi thinks that it would be better to make a request for a gate online because crowded places terrify her. But she decided to come in person to make sure that she was not in danger of being demoted. The girl remembers her past unsuccessful experience of going to the gate and hopes that this will not happen again. The message about the available training gates comes almost instantly. Lexi thought that she would have to wait a few days for the dungeon and her partner to find her. Therefore, the girl immediately sends her agreement to participate so as not to miss the opportunity. Despite the fact that the gates open almost every day, each new one still attracts a crowd of onlookers. Lexi is geared up in combat gear and mentally cheers herself up for success. At the gate, she is met by the main character. He calls out to the girl, who is still mentally adjusting at the entrance to the portal. Sean gives his name and introduces himself as a support hunter who will help Lexi on her sortie. The girl suddenly bows low and thanks the guy for agreeing to go with her. The main character apologizes for the delay and offers to start the journey. In the memories obtained from the system, Lexi was demoted to the rank of C due to her constantly failing the qualification tests. But thanks to the player system, the girl still revealed her talent and became the archer goddess. Fortunately, the main character knows what kind of talent Lexi received in the future, and he is going to awaken him in the gate through which they go, because this does not require participation in the system. On the other side of the portal, the heroes come across a patrol of goblins that are exploring the area. Lexi peeks out from behind the bushes, checking which way the enemies are heading. She is relieved to realize that the goblins are taking a different direction and moving away from the heroes. The girl looks at her hand and thanks herself for a successful purchase. She purchased a bracelet that tracks changes in mana at a short distance from the wearer. Lexi remembers that she forgot to talk to her partner about the dungeon conditions. The girl explains that she was going to go alone and wanted to kill enemies herself to practice. She promises to give all the loot in return and compensate for the time spent on the passage with money. But Sean is not interested in the loot from the dungeon. He asks the girl not to worry about it. Lexi thanks his partner for his understanding and gets to her feet to start training. She pulls the first arrow out of her quiver and draws the bowstring, aiming at the goblin. The girl is completely concentrated. She decides not to rush and choose the right moment for the attack. Finally, Lexi lowers the bowstring and the arrow rushes towards the enemy with great speed. The projectile flies so fast that the goblin's reaction is not enough to dodge the shot. A moment later, half of the monster's head is smashed by a powerful archer attack. However, the rest of the goblins remain untouched. The arrow passed by them, and the green-skinned bandits begin to look for a source of threat. Wasting no time, the girl sends the next projectile flying. But this time her hand trembles and the shot misses. The girl fails to kill a single opponent. Sean notes that Lexi's destructive power far exceeds A rank. But with such accuracy, there is no point in her skills, because she cannot hit almost point-blank range. The girl hits one of the 3 arrows and silently notes this record. She is going to kill the remaining 4 enemies in 2 shots, especially since the arrows are coming to an end. But the archer does not allow her to focus on aiming. A sudden sound coming from the thicket of the forest. This is one of the goblins using his bugle to summon support. Lexi is confused. She did not expect that the monsters could use additional equipment. In less than a minute, help comes to the aid of the goblins. The girl begins to get nervous, covered with sweat, and it becomes more and more difficult for her to aim. The mana detecting bracelet begins to vibrate wildly on the wrist, adding tension. Lexi realizes that she is surrounded. The goblins are preparing to attack en masse. The girl's thoughts begin to run wild. She does not know whether to attack enemies in front of her or behind her. The goblins jump out of the ambush and are about to attack the hesitant girl from behind. Their path is blocked by dozens of energy blades sticking into the ground. The main character comes out of hiding in the forest and asks Lexi to help him urgently. The girl is surprised by the atypical ability for the creators of the D rank. She asks why the hero lied to her about the level. But Sean assures that he was honest. It is because of his low rank that the barrier will not last long. Finally losing her temper, Lexi asks what she should do. Sean turns around and points to a cluster of goblins in the thicket. He asks the girl to shoot in that direction, using all his remaining strength. The archer agrees, turns on the spot, and draws the bowstring. The mana energy begins to flow along the arrow. Finally, Lexi shoots. The arrow turns into a huge clot and clears the way for the heroes. Sean grabs the girl's hand. He says that now is not the time to slow down and ask questions. After all, the goblins are not going to wait until the heroes have had enough of talking and are already getting very close. With a smile on his face, the protagonist begins to run and drags Lexi with him. Sean's plan goes perfectly. The heroes stop only after running a few kilometers, finally reaching the right cave. Lexi is almost suffocating. She is not used to such physical and mental stress. The archer does not understand where they ran and whether the heroes managed to break away from the goblins. She recalls the fear she felt during her hasty escape, and how terrible goblins with animal grins almost caught up with the heroes in the thicket of the forest. All the girl's thoughts are confused. She barely understands what happened and how to get out of this situation. Most of all, she is surprised that the main character remains absolutely calm. Lexi decides that it is time for her to end the outing, and she tells Sean that she will definitely pay him compensation. But the guy objects. It is still too dangerous for the heroes to return to the exit from the dungeon. After all, the goblins are alarmed and will comb the surrounding area for some time to come. In addition, the heroes lost the flare when escaping, so they will have to wait for the monsters to leave. Lexi does not like this situation. She asks how long it will take. Sean replies that goblins usually patrol the area for 12 hours. Lexi clearly doesn't like the prospect of being stuck in a dungeon for such a long time. She falls to her knees and states that the heroes will soon come to an end. Sean embellished the picture. In fact, goblins usually search for escaped prey within half an hour. But the main character is glad that the girl in such a state is ready to believe in anything and does not notice the catch. He hopes to explore the cave as soon as possible, which the main character planned to get to. He can only somehow convince the girl to go inside with him, and the guy thinks over a plan. He is sure that Lexi will just run away in a panic as soon as he mentions the journey deep into the dark cave. Finally catching her breath and more or less calming down, the girl begins to talk to the main character. She apologizes and believes that the whole situation happened through her fault. The archer is almost crying, her voice is trembling, and Sean can't even make out some of the words. The girl reproaches herself for the fact that even in a dungeon of such a low level, she allows the mistakes of a beginner. Remembering one of the past forays, Lexi finally can't stand it anymore, and tears flow down her face. Sean snaps his fingers to bring the archer to her senses and asks her to fulfill one request. The guy says that since they still have a lot of time before going back, they can chat on the way, as they explore the mysterious cave ahead. The girl agrees to fulfill the request and the heroes go inside. On the way, Lexi asks the hero why he needed help. She warns the hero that despite her high rank, she has almost no experience in dungeons. The main character realizes that the girl has never been to the training gate and tells her that this cave is always inhabited by an elite monster. For personal reasons, he wants to kill the monster, and therefore he needed the help of a high-ranking hunter. Sean plays on the girl's feelings and says that she is the first who agreed to take him as support. Lexi silently perceives the information. The hero clearly managed to touch her to the core. Finally, the archer stops and resolutely agrees to help the guy in a difficult task. She remembers that with Sean's help, they escape from a goblin ambush. In addition, she knows from experience how disappointing it is when you are not accepted into any team. The girl's bracelet begins to vibrate, indicating that a source of mana has appeared nearby. The heroes stop, and Sean shines his flashlight forward to see what is in the depths of the cave. A huge elite monster emerges from the darkness, its head almost touching the ceiling of the cave. Lexi immediately runs forward. She asks the protagonist to move away from the threat, and she draws the bowstring. The enclosed arrow lights up with a blue glow of mana. The girl manages to direct the projectile directly at the target, but the monster easily defends itself from a shot with a huge club. The archer did not expect such a reaction from the clumsy giant. For a second, she freezes with her mouth open in surprise. But he quickly pulls himself together and loads the next arrow for a shot. As soon as her hands begin to tremble, panic slowly creeps into the archer's head. In her mind, the girl swears and forces herself to shoot, because now is not the right time to give up. Lexi turns her head, and what she sees makes her feel even worse. The monster stops hesitating and goes on the attack, bringing a club the size of each of the heroes to hit. The archer is frozen with fear, unable to even move to save her life. The main character comes to the rescue, who grabs the girl by the collar of her shirt, and he abruptly throws Lexi off the line of impact, which would definitely take Lexi's life. Unable to get up, the archer can only watch the horrific scene of reprisals. The giant hits the floor of the cave. The walls of the grotto shake and clouds of dust erupt from under the club. Confused, Lexi tries to see where the main character is. She does not understand whether he managed to dodge. This situation takes the girl back several years, to the day she dared to enter the gate. A girl from Lexi's team accused the archer of low shooting skills. Moreover, the ally claimed that Lexi not only missed, but almost killed her with her arrow. Since then, the archer was not wanted to be taken into any team. The other awakened considered her a failure. Apparently, the members of the team with whom she went to the first dungeon spread rumors that the girl would rather kill her own people than hit the monster. Lexi's life turned into a nightmare. Everyone around her turned away from her, and she felt very lonely. Once again, the archer thinks that she should have given up the idea of becoming a hunter after the first failure. She is sure that the giant finished off Sean, naturally blaming herself for his death. But the main character is alive and well, with his skills. Dying at the hands of a D-rank monster would be a shame. Sean casts the clone ability and blocks the elite monster's next strike. The main character shouts to Lexi that she only needs to listen to him and calm down, then they will win. Sean prepared a surprise that would work in an emergency. The hero continues to prompt Lexi. He asks her to take a closer look and see the weaknesses of the monster. The girl feels her senses suddenly heightened, although she does not understand why. The girl rises to her feet and asserts that the sensations do not let her down. The archer's left eye glows with golden fire, as if a spell has been placed on it. Now Lexi knows exactly where to aim to be sure to defeat the monster with one shot. The girl pulls the bowstring with a confident hand. Streams of energy run from hand to arrow. For a second, Lexi closes her eyes and adjusts herself. She thinks only about the projectile and the target. When the archer opens her eyes, she is ready to defeat the monster. There is not a shadow of doubt in her thoughts. The shot arrow turns into a golden ball of energy, which breaks down towards the monster at great speed. The green giant manages to turn around and see where the threat to his life comes from. The main character watches the development of events and thinks that he managed to do everything right. The monster still manages to raise its club in an attempt to defend itself from the attack. But this does not help him. The flow of energy is so powerful that it crushes the weapon and pierces it through, along with the giant's body. The main character looks at what is happening with a smile. He made sure that the plan worked. And the archer looks at her opponent, unable to utter a word. She herself did not expect that she has such strength. The shot was so powerful that it tore off the giant hand of the monster with which he was holding the club. And in the body of the monster, there is a gaping hole through which you can see the rest of the cave. Finally, the giant falls on his back with a loud sound and falls silent. The fight is over. Lexi is breathing heavily. She has not experienced such stress for a long time and is very surprised by her ability. The protagonist approaches the girl and says that the event was risky, but the archer can finally fight at full strength. Lexi begins to ask questions one after another, wondering who Sean really is, why he acts like he knew things in advance, and what his words about awakening talent mean. But the hero asks the girl not to rush because they still have plenty of time to talk on the way out of the gate. The archer begins to demand answers, threatening to punish her otherwise. Suddenly, she stops talking and freezes in place with a strange expression on her face. The girl clutches her head and moans softly. She is clearly getting worse. The sound of her falling body echoes through the cavern, bouncing off the walls. Sean puts the girl on his shoulders and lets out a heavy sigh. He drags the archer to the exit of the cave and thinks that sometimes allies are literally a heavy burden. The hero reassures himself that the day was successful and the girl's abilities were fully revealed. After Lexi wakes up, she becomes ashamed of her behavior in the cave. She asks Sean to forgive her for questioning his honesty because the guy saved her life twice. The main character calms the girl down and says that everything is fine and she should not worry. He asks to stop apologizing because Lexi has been begging for forgiveness for half an hour since she woke up. Sean reaches out and tells the girl to return the pendant that is in her pocket. Lexi reaches into her pocket and tries to take out the jewel, her hands still trembling from the stress she has experienced. Finally, she manages to get the amulet and gives it to the main character. Sean checks the pendant in the sunlight, and by the changed color of the gem, he understands that it was activated successfully. This is a rare piece of equipment obtained from the Burning Harpy's hideout. The pendant activates the skill of heightened senses, but for this, you need to fulfill one strict condition. The owner of the jewel must experience some strong feeling. In some subjects, the amulet was activated on pain of imminent death, and they use their heightened senses to, for example, dodge an arrow flying at their foreheads. After examining the stone, Sean returns it to the girl's hand. She will still need it. The main character thinks that fear was also best suited for the archer, although it turned out to be quite difficult to bring her to the right emotion. Sean wanted to implement his plan earlier, but the stone was difficult to find in stock even despite the high price. Craig helped the hero with the amulet. He coped with the search for such a rarity in just 2 days. When fighting an elite monster, the archer only felt her hidden potential, and she still had a lot to learn. Therefore, the main character gives her advice on how to act better in battle. He recommends changing the short bow to a long one in order to operate from the maximum distance, and practice more on monsters to overcome the fear of the enemy. The girl listens carefully to Sean's instructions. He gives really useful advice, but suddenly she interrupts his speech and begins to speak timidly, asking to listen to her to the end. The guy is surprised, but stops and asks the girl to continue. Lexi thanks Sean first of all for saving his life and for the magic pendant. In that fight in the cave, she was very frightened and then felt the pendant activate. It gave her a feeling of incredible strength and confidence, extinguished all her fears and doubts. At that moment, the girl began to see all the weaknesses of the elite monster and realized where she needed to aim. The archer is embarrassed and says that although her powers are at a high level, she has always been hindered by self-doubt. But in the short time she met Sean, the girl grew over herself more than during the years of her independent attempts. Lexi interrupts and says that the main character is probably already tired of her chatter. But the guy calms the archer and promises to leave her his number so that she can contact him if necessary. The girl is happy and her cheeks are covered with blush. She does not often communicate with other people, and even more so makes friends. A message arrives on Sean's phone, and the hero immediately takes his cell phone out of his pocket. This is Craig. He asks the guy to call back as soon as possible. We are talking about an emergency. After completing the sortie into the dungeon, the main character calls back the head of the guild. Craig wants to enlist the help of the gunsmith, although the situation is still unclear, but something serious is coming. Sean easily agrees to help because the head helped the guy out a lot by finding a magic amulet for Lexi. The man thanks the main character for his responsiveness and is glad that the pendant came in handy. The head hangs up the phone and immediately there is a slight knock on the door of his office. It turns towards the entrance and invites the visitor to enter. This is Lucy. She reports that the president of the association has returned to the office and it is time for them to move to a meeting. The head and assistant walk down the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors of the guild. The girl reflects on the reason for her visit to the association and comes to disappointing conclusions. She says that usually the president of the organization sent even important instructions by letter. Lucy finds it strange that no official documents have even arrived. And most likely the situation is extremely serious since the head of the guild was summoned personally. Perhaps a gate of the highest rank has reopened in the city, which only Craig and his ilk can handle. But the head of the guild reassures the girl. He says that Sean has already agreed to help, and that if the head himself fights at full strength, as before, there is nothing to fear. Craig thinks to himself that he insisted on signing a contract with Sean for a reason, and smiles. Lucy notices a change in the boss's mood, which has become much more optimistic lately. However, she does not understand how the head could offer unlimited support to a hunter like Sean. She notes that, while berserkers can be emotional, Craig is one of the most level-headed and sane people she knows. And it was unlikely that such an experienced hunter was impressed by some trinket created by a D-rank armorer. Lucy thinks that she needs to find out more details, because Craig rarely contacts the main character and even less often invites him to the guild in person. Finally, the heroes come to the office of the president of the Hunters Association. At the entrance, they are met by a security guard who greets the arrivals and clarifies why Craig came alone. The head replies that he was not aware of the other participants in the meeting. The guard says that another guild leader is expected and Craig will have to wait. The head of the guild asks to tell who the second participant of the meeting is, but the guard already notices a man who will participate in the meeting behind the backs of the heroes. A member of the association greets the guild leader who has arrived. Craig and Lucy turn around at the sound of a voice behind them. It seems familiar to them. It's Jared, waving and greeting to the people gathered at the door of the president's office. In her mind, Lucy thinks that she is not happy to see this man and would rather not be in the same building with him. Jared smiles broadly and says that he never expected to see members of the Overkill Guild here. This man is the only one in the whole country who can make Craig lose his temper. Pretending that his eyesight is poor, Jared comes close to Craig. He crouches slightly and mockingly asks how the head of the supposedly unknown guild is doing. Craig and Lucy's faces become darker than a cloud. They can't stand Jared's clowning. But he still does not calm down and says that the problem of the Overkill Guild is not in the employees, but in the stupidity of their boss. Craig pushes the guy away from him and says that there is no time for idiotic provocations. Jared laughs and says that there is hardly anything more important for the guild leader than the low-level gates he constantly goes to. Even Lucy can't stand it anymore. She comes forward and demands that the guy explain himself. Jared begins to spout outright nonsense about Craig entering the gate to practice killing rookies. The girl begins to defend her boss, but he asks her not to succumb to provocations. The guildmaster asks the guard to let them into the office, because it's high time to start the meeting. The employee opens the door of the room and begins to say that the guild leaders have arrived. But the president interrupts his words. He has already heard them swearing in the corridor and asks to invite visitors. Lucy sits down at the office door waiting for Craig, and an embarrassed security guard offers her at least a cup of tea, but she refuses. The president of the association begins to bring the young leaders up to speed. He says that a gate of indeterminate rank has appeared on the outskirts of the city. Craig thinks it's a gate with a mistake and clarifies the matter with Principal Jacob. But he answers in the negative. The gate is so strange that it is impossible to even approximately measure the level of its mana. Jared hears about such a dungeon for the first time and raises his eyebrows in surprise. Craig also finds such a statement surprising. Even the gate with an error can be measured. With the help of a special tool, specialists measure the amount of mana in the gate. Therefore, the rank of dungeons usually depends on the rank of the monsters that inhabit it. The association then sends scouts to confirm the rank of the gate. But this time, the measuring devices did not help to determine the level of the dungeon. After the failure with the measurement, the president ordered to send several detachments for reconnaissance. But not a single one of the dozens of people sent back. Jared abruptly throws his legs over his legs. He begins to either get irritated or nervous. And he asks the president why no one has yet reported about the unidentified gate. Jacob ignores the remark and continues to talk about the curtain of the gate that could disappear at any moment. Then the monsters will break through to Earth and nothing good will come of it. The guild leaders themselves should remember the results of similar incidents. Therefore, Jacob apologizes for the audacity, but says that refusal to participate in the operation is not accepted this time. He asks the young people to leave any differences in the past and unite the efforts of the two guilds for the sake of the security of the whole country. The president wanted to call the head of the third guild for help, but she found herself abroad. Jacob gives the leaders 2 days to prepare and promises to cover all expenses, as well as generously reward the participants of the sortie. Craig asks if the participating team should only be made up of guild members. The president replies that the situation is emergency and any trusted people can be involved in the successful completion of the task. Craig smiles. He will definitely take Sean with him, who will make it much easier to clear the dungeon. Jared returns to his guild headquarters. He is annoyed and finds himself throwing off his jacket and ordering his subordinates to assemble the best team available. The guy did not like Craig's smile during the meeting. He thinks that he is up to something. Jared has always considered Guildmaster Overkill to be his rival and is angry at the thought of losing to him. Suddenly, the guy comes up with a gloomy but brilliant idea, and he orders his henchmen to find one girl. Jared's assistants are horrified by the very name of the sorceress. But the head does not want to listen to anything and demands that Kate be recruited into his team by any means. He is sure that with such an ally, he will be able to wipe the nose of the head of the Overkill Guild. 2 days later, a team led by Craig arrives at an unidentified gate. In order not to sow panic in the country, the president asked to limit the number of participants to the 4 most trusted people, and if possible, to carry out the sortie as discreetly as possible. Melissa begins to get annoyed. She doesn't like that the representatives of the Shinhwa Guild have not yet appeared. Jax replies that there is still time and the girl should relax. Melissa nervously twists her gun on her finger. She can't stand the mannerisms of the rival guild members. He asks if the bullet in the head helps to learn good manners. Jax immediately slaps the girl on the head for such words, because this can lead to a conflict that is not needed on the battlefield. Melissa notes that the deputy head of the guild is simply brutally strong. But such words anger Jax even more. He asks again who the girl called a brute, and he begins to chase her in order to teach manners to Melissa herself. Craig thanks Sean for agreeing to come to the rescue. The head thought that the guy would refuse. But the main character explains that Craig did him a great favor by getting a rare amulet for the archer. And so the guy wants to repay good for good, because he also has honor. Naturally, Sean's gratitude was not the only reason to come to the cleanup. 5 days ago, the system gave the hero a hidden task, which must be completed right inside this gate. For completing such especially rare tasks, some awakened received not only valuable equipment, but even new abilities. Craig interrupts the hero's thoughts. Suddenly, he apologizes in advance for Jared's behavior. A group of Shinhwa Guild is just coming out of the forest. The commander apologizes with a grin for being late. After all, work is in full swing in his guild, unlike the Overkill Guild, which has nothing to do. Grinning mockingly, Jared reminds Craig of going to the low-level gate again. Melissa is shaking at the mere appearance of the Shinhwa Guild members, and Jax asks her to keep her composure. The girl is already starting to blurt out obscene curses, but the deputy head covers her mouth with his huge hand. The Overkill and Shinhwa Guilds have long fought for the first place in the country. Sean thinks that the media only adds fuel to the fire. Journalists constantly release contradictory articles about which of the guilds deserves to be called the best. Jared finally notices the protagonist and looks at him in surprise. He is the only member of Craig's team he doesn't know, so the head of Shinhwa realizes that this was the Overkill Guild's trump card. Jared laughs out loud and tries to hurt the protagonist. Shinhwa's supervisor even begins to think that Craig is mocking and clearing the dungeon is some kind of joke for him. Sean silently listens to Jared's tirade. The hero decides not to react to the provocations. The tank from Shinhwa's team asks the boss to calm down and not start ahead of time. Moreover, a newcomer is also fighting on their side today. The girl comes out of the back rows and asks to hurry up, because she still has a lot of things to do. Melissa recognizes the famous Valerie and is horrified by this composition of the team. This girl is the strongest elemental master in Korea and can use all 6 elements. Melissa isn't sure if Sean is any match for Valerie's unique Valerie, but she hopes guild leader Overkill wasn't wrong. Finally, the girl greets the allies and offers to start clearing the gates. In her opinion, the matter will be spitting. But from the memories of the future, Sean knows that this gate poses a serious threat, and in that reality, the sortie failed. Of the 8 awakened ones who entered the portal of the highest level, only Craig was able to come out by using his skill. After that, the gate suddenly disappeared, and the rest of the participants were declared missing. Behind the portal, the heroes are waiting, not for the usual cave with hordes of monsters, but for an expensive mansion. Huge creepy dolls act as opponents here. Jared easily smashes opponents literally with one hand. Sean watches the fight and can't understand why it's so simple. A few minutes earlier, the team entered the portal and saw the mansion for the first time. Suddenly, the portal behind Jax began to emit strange sounds, uncharacteristic of an ordinary gate. Another second, and the heavy carved doors close with a loud bang, closing the exit from the dungeon behind them. Jax does his best to open the passage, but he fails. Now the 3 awakened are trying, if not to open the door, then at least to smash it to pieces.